Hello, YouTube. Hello to everyone in the chat and everyone watching on the VOD. This is your host, Shintigercurl, that dude in the straw hat, bringing you a long-awaited return to Shintigercurl Streamin. How's everybody doing right now? It is Friday, October 31st, 2025. It's Halloween. That's right. Anyone worshiping Sam Hain around here? What's going on? There's a lot to talk about, and my filter keeps moving when I don't want it to stop. But yeah, we are back after some delays due to equipment issues, health issues, both for myself and my extended family. But we're back tonight. As per popular request, on the community tab, we'll be looking at some more Warmachine lore, and it's probably some very important lore. But before all of that, you already know what time it is. It's time to get out your guns, lock and load, because it's time to shoot the shit. Devil, welcome. Glad to see you again, man. Also, thanks for the donation earlier this week. It's really much appreciated. It really helped out. Haven't touched it or anything. I'm just saving it up, so I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. So, a lot to talk about since the last time we got here. Probably the one thing that everybody's worrying about is, of course, is the main talking point everyone's talking about is the government shutdown. Not just for the fact that it's shut down SNAP, also known as food stamps. And in case you didn't know, if you didn't see the community post I made, your humble host is actually is on SNAP. Yeah, I'm on food stamps. It's been rough for us. My mom's been in and out of the hospital for most of the summer. Turns out that all things told, she had something akin to blood poisoning, and it got really bad, like to the point where she couldn't keep anything down. Like, she kept throwing up, like anytime she put anything down her mouth, like food, soup, water, tea, anything, she just threw it right back up. Even gum was too much for her. So me and my dad told me we had to just take her in because she was getting dehydrated and she was suffering from the earlier signs of dehydration, and because she just wasn't keeping shit down. And turns out she had something akin to blood poisoning, and if we hadn't put her in when we did, she might not have made it. So thankfully she's back to health, back to normal, and some motherfuckers are gonna get sued because of this. So yeah, there's that. But we're gonna try to keep things fresh. We're gonna try to keep the mood light, happy, and all this stuff. I got my chai tea right here. I've been drinking a lot of chai tea for my own gut benefits and what have you. And nothing much has been going on in my life. I'll just have to tell you right now. I've not mentioned this on any kind of social media, but I had a girlfriend couple of weeks ago. Yeah, I was off the market. Yeah, and it's actually pretty incredible on how I was able to get a girlfriend. So I'm not going to tell you what her name is. I'm not even going to show you her face or anything like that. But I saw her on Instagram and I just hit her up. I just slid into her DMs, and I'm not shitting you. This is exactly what I said to her the first time I talked to this person, because I didn't know who the fuck this person was. They just was very attractive to me. And the thing I said to her was, and I quote, "Nice tits." Yeah, that was my opener. She's like, "Really? That's what you're gonna open with? Nice tits?" And it's like, better than saying hello or hi or how's it going. You got nice tits. I'm not gonna lie to you. And that actually works. And she's like, "Okay, I'm impressed. That actually took some thought. Okay, thanks for that." And we just kind of hit it off, and we were together for like, yeah, it was gutsy. When you're getting as old as I am, you just stop learning to give a fuck about some things like that. But yeah, unfortunately, it only lasted like a week or two. before I just decided to cut it off because of issues that we were having. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but I don't have any ill will towards her or anything like that. I just hope that she gets the help she needs, because she needs some help. I would have preferred not to, but yeah, she just needed some help. So yeah, and so that kind of filled my quota for trying to attract or being in a relationship. So I'm just gonna be by myself for a while. Yeah, it ended amicably in a sense. I don't wish her ill will or anything like that. Things just kind of got to the point where it wasn't conducive for us to stay together. So there's that. Last week and this week we had Halloween Dynamite. Yes, and one of the greatest freaking swerves I have ever seen. But first and foremost, we got to go through what happened on this week's episode. Jon Moxley continues his massive crash out after after saying I quit to Darby Allin in one of the most painful I quit matches I've ever seen in my entire life. The last week, he went up against the conglomeration's Kyle O'Reilly. Kyle locked him in a ankle lock, and John wasn't able to get out, so he just decided to slug the referee Bryce Rensburg, DQing himself. And they had a rematch this week, and it was just as good as the last match. Kyle was just giving it everything he had and countering everything that John was throwing at him. It ended when they went outside. John was trying to go for a paradigm shift onto a chair. Kyle countered into a front guillotine, and they both got counted out. And Marina got uber pissed and proceeded to clock Aubrey Edwards. Yeah, that got her a lot of hate. So the Death Riders come out, the conglomeration comes out, and in one of the laziest ways to say this match, Mark Briscoe, the leader of the conglomeration, gave the mic to Orange Cassidy, and he said, "Fine, blood and guts." So yeah, we're gonna have not one, but two blood and guts matches this year in about 2 weeks from now on Dynamite. One for the men and one for the ladies. And speaking of the ladies this week, we have the first match of the women's tag team title tournament. That's right. If you didn't watch Wrestle Dream or the previous weeks, you would know that Tony Khan has officially unveiled the women's tag team titles. Well, anybody who has been watching the media scrums for the last couple of months knows that the belts actually have been made for months now. Tony actually wanted to do the tournament a lot earlier, but the timing was off with a lot of talent, a lot of the women roster that he wants to be in the title hunt out for injury and such, and he wanted to make it so that when he finally does announce the tag team titles, they would be in a good enough position for the roster so that they could have the titles, and as well as building up the teams, because every team in this tournament has have grown organically as teams. They're not just slapped together for whatever reason. They feel legitimate, and honestly speaking, anyone in this tournament could win it. That's how I feel. I feel like anybody that would be anyone who won the tournament, I'd be like, I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. So this week, the first round matchup took place between the team of Jamie Hayter and Queen Amanana versus the Sisters of Sin, 2/3 of the Triangle of Madness, consisting of Julia Hart and Sky Blue. Tag match was fucking excellent, magnificent, excellent stuff. And of course, Tekla had to stick her 2 cents in and help her goofy golf girl sisters get the victory. So they're moving on to the next round. But we had some unfortunate news. Penelope Ford and the Megasis Megan Bayne were going to be in the tournament, but unfortunately, after a moonsault at Wrestle Dream, Penelope Ford is out with a torn, I think it's OCL, something in her arm. They announced, they mentioned it during the tag match, and then they would cut to the backstage interview, and there was Penelope Ford, arm in a sling, and she said that she'll be out indefinitely. And that is the one word you never want to hear when it comes to an injury. Indefinitely means you don't know when she's going to be back. So yeah, really sucks for Penelope Ford. She and Megan were an amazing duo and was one of the leads I had for winning the whole tournament. So the question becomes, so not only is Penelope Ford out of the tag team tournament, she is out of the Blood and Guts match. And I know she really wanted to go crazy in that match. So then the Megasis said, she was basically saying, anyone who wants to be my partner, step up. And then Marina Shafir, fresh off clocking Aubrey Edwards, steps up and she says, I like the sound of that. And the two of them are teaming up. Yes, Megan Bayne. Keep in mind, Megan Bayne has only been pinned once since she joined AEW this year, and that was to timeless Toni Storm. She hasn't been beaten in singles since then. She hasn't eaten a pinfall or anything. So she's teaming up with Marina Shafir, probably the most feared woman on the entire roster because of her association with the Death Riders. And just because Jon Moxley just kind of slides in there and he kind of gives that face like, these two together? That's crazy. The gift is out there. Jon Moxley's the gift that keeps on giving. So anyway, also shout outs to our current women's champion, Chris Statlander. She came dressed as Goku Black from Dragon Ball Super. I was like, wait a minute. Ain't Goku Black you're wearing, Statlander? So I approved all of that. She, of course, has to defend her world title against Ultimo Monet, aka Mercedes Monet, aka 12 belts Monet. That's right, Mercedes Monet has 12 belts, and she's hoping to add the world title to her growing collection of belts. But also, Mercedes decides that she is also going to join forces with the forever champion, the goddess of Ring of Honor, Athena. And if you didn't know, Athena's run as ROH Women's World Champion has reached epic proportions, as not only is she the longest reigning ROH Women's Champion in history, she is the longest reigning champion in the brand's history. And I'm not just talking about Ring of Honor under TK's watch. I mean in the history of the entire company. She has had a longer title reign than anyone ever in that company. And the two of them have joined forces and are in this tag team tournament. So, woo, this tournament is awesome. Speaking of tag teams, we had a fatal four-way determine who will be the number one contenders to the AEW tag team champions, Bandito and Brody King, Brodio. The teams in the match were the team of Jet Speed, consisting of the Jet, Kevin Knight, and his tag team partner, Speedball Mike Bailey, the returning Jurassic Express, Jungle Jack Perry, he's now Jungle Jack, and Luchasaurus. Top guys, Cash Wheeler and Dax Harwood, FTR, alongside Hollis Stokely Hathaway. And of course, Nick and Matt, the Broke Bucks, still looking for that money. After a fantastic fatal four-way that just showed you tag team wrestling is alive and well, the top guys earned their shot at Brodio. The Don Callis family, which apparently I'm now a member of, looking at my phone, did a summit to hash out the disagreements between the unified champion, the Rainmaker, Kazuchika Okada, and the Alpha, the current IWGP World Heavyweight Champion, Konosuke Takeshita. After a tense back and forth, Don basically orders Soup to shake Okada's hand. And Soup has these two have never liked each other. They have just been at odds the entire time. But Soup was like, okay, I'm gonna shake his hand. And Okada goes to shake it, but then he flips him the bird and does that shit-eating green of his. And basically they had the entire Don Callis family had to keep those two apart. So there's that. Now for the Swerve, and I don't mean the wrestler. Swerve, get well soon. We need you back. So, main event. Fatal 4-way to determine the new #1 contender for Hangman Adam Page's world title. The Ops, Samoa Joe. The Hurt Syndicates, Bobby Lashley. Hook. And finally, the leader of the Demand, Ricochet. Great little Fatal 4-way match. All four of those guys looked amazing, especially Ricochet. Ricochet has never looked better. I mean, he is, ever since he turned heel, he has just been living his best life. And now that he's hooked up with the Gates of Agony, including that sexy motherfucker Bishop Khan, they have formed their own group called The Demand, and they've been in an intense feud with the Hurt Syndicate. So anyway, needless to say, Samoa Joe wins and gets a rematch against Hangman Adam Page. Now, here's where the swerve comes in. The entire night, well, this the entire week, AEW has been showing scenes from past Halloween Dynamites. One in particular where a certain cowboy who does cowboy shit was dressed as the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. We all remember that match. It was an amazing, goofy match. We all loved it. It was a great match. So, during the entire night, we kept seeing a bunch of people in costumes hanging around the backstage area. And one of them was the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And like myself and a lot of the sickos on Blue Sky, we were like, oh, Hangman's going to attack him dressed as the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, like he did against the Bucks. Now, also in the evening, we learned it out on commentary. They were doing a two-man team this week, being that of Excalibur and Bryan Danielson. In case you didn't know, Bryan Danielson, after somewhat retiring, has been put on commentary full time, and he's been a great boon. And he actually appeared on the commentary table with a Hechicero mask. He's a Hechicero fan. We're all Hechicero fans. So anyway, Tony Schiavone wasn't there. Tony Schiavone pops up later that night to do the interview segment between Penelope Ford and Megan Bayne. And he was wearing a Phantom of the Opera mask. And people were like, oh, that's a nice callback, because decades and decades ago, back in WCW, Tony Schiavone wore a Halloween-themed costume, which was the Phantom of the Opera mask. So, okay, that's nice. So, Joe wins the match. He brings in his fellow Ops, Powerhouse Hobbs and Shibata. Yes, Shibata is a heel now. I'm still getting used to it. And they're celebrating. And Tony Schiavone gets on the mic and he says, "Well, congratulations to you, Samoa Joe. We are gonna have to we're gonna do a championship contract signing right here, right now in the ring." So all those people who were in costume that entire night come out to the ring. Last among them being the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. So Tony gets in the ring, hands Joe the contract, and Joe says, well, these guys are in here for my protection, so guys, protect me. So Hobbs and Shibata proceed to beat the shit out of the costume people, leaving only the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And they grab them, they're holding them down, and Joe gets in his face like, oh, you think we're stupid? We don't think it's not you? And he takes off the mask, and it is not Hangman Adam Page. So I guess Hangman's not there. So they're in the ring celebrating. Tony's outside the ring. He says, okay, we're going to celebrate some more with you, and we're bringing in some beers. So they bring some beers in, and everyone begins to notice that Tony's voice sounds a little off, like there are two people talking. And Tony, as they're drinking with their backs to Tony slides in the ring, and this is when I begin to notice that Tony's looking a little different. And he's like, I hope you're ready for this cowboy shit. And then that's when the whole crowd loses their shit, and they look down and they realize that's not Tony Schiavone. And he takes Hobbs and Shibata to Dick Kick City, and he bashes a beer bottle over Joe's head, and he takes off the mask, and he reveals himself to be none other than Hangman Adam Page. We got played. They conditioned us to think that Hangman was going to attack Joe as the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and they expertly played it off. Like, as Master Miller would say, they played us like a damn fiddle, and I am very much appreciative of that. Very much appreciative of that shit. So, we got some stuff to look forward to on the wrestling front. But I know that's not what you're here for. So, I'm gonna get right to it. Law, would you be so kind? Thank you, Law. All right. Tonight, since I held a poll on the community page, I was going to play some Root, but some people wanted me to do some reading for some Warmachine shit. So we're going to do some Warmachine stuff tonight. And I was trying to figure out what would be a good story to read. And then I remembered that I didn't really dig too deeply into this event. So I decided I'm going to do this. So I had to call up and pull up a lot of documentation, a lot of information. So we're going to be looking at probably the most important event in the lore, the claiming. Now, if you haven't been reading or watching along, if you're pretty much new to Warmachine, I know there's at least one person who is probably listening to this right now, and she is not familiar with Warmachine, so I'll just give her the brief cliff notes. Warmachine, tabletop game, also an RPG, kind of like Warhammer 40k, but not so grimdark. It takes place on a planet called Cain, spelled C-A-E-N, specifically on a continent called Western Immorin, and there are these bunch of factions or nations called the Iron Kingdoms that are vying for supremacy. And there are humans, there's trolls, there's dwarves, there's elves, there's zombies, there are dragons, there's all kinds of crazy shit in this thing. Now, this event is particularly important. Now, if you want to know more about the background in a more dramatic fashion, you can check out my The Hermit of Hinchhold Speaks compilation video, where a character in the series, the Hermit of Hinchhold, gives an unabridged version of the history of Cain, as well as the history of things that went on behind the scenes. So, for anyone who doesn't know, to get right into it, the origins of the claiming stretch back to the prehistoric days of Cain. Now, in the area known as Urcain, which is the afterlife or the otherworldly afterlife of Cain, where all the gods and all your spirits go to reside, there are beings that have existed on the fringes of reality called the Infernals. Now, all the gods and all the goddesses of Warmachine are very well aware of them, and we find out via the Hermit that they instigated a lot of shit when it comes to the lore. Most specifically, what happened with the Divine Court, the gods of the elves. Now, in the lore official, the Divine Court created this thing called the Bridge of Worlds, where they wanted to come and be with their creations, which were the elves. But something went wrong, and when they jumped over, the bridge exploded, destroying the Elven Empire. And the elves were those elves that were closest to the gods when the bridge blew up were safe. Millions of elves died in it. They call it the Cataclysm. So, for a long time, the elves tried to guide their people to a new land because their empire had been suddenly blown to shit. And then sometime after the foundation of their kingdom, called Ios, the gods left them to try to find a way to get back to their homeland, the Veld, which is in Urcain. And for a long time, no one knew what happened to them. and an event called the Riveting happened, where a lot of the Iosian elves and their priests went crazy at the same time, like they just went nuts. And then a few years later, one of their gods, Skyra, appeared in their capital city and just kind of collapsed in one of their fanes, which is like a church of theirs. And so an organization called the Retribution of Skyra believed that the connection between her going into the coma and their gods vanishing had something to do with humans learning magic, because in this world, humans didn't always know magic. They didn't have human wizards or sorcerers or witches and stuff like that. Humans were just not able to use magic. Now, going further, we actually find out from the Hermit of Henschel what happened in these events. So, the Hermit says that the Infernals were at the very gates of the Veld, where the Divine Court were hanging, that's where they lived, and the Infernals were trying to get into the Veld. So the Divine Court were like, okay, we'll just have to leave, and then once we'll go to the real world, we'll go to the human world, we'll go to Cain, the living world, hang out with our people, and then once the Infernals realize that the Veld has been abandoned, they're just going to leave, and then we'll just go right back. Then the bridge blew up, and it kind of stranded them there. But so because the Infernals couldn't get into our world so easily, souls could go pass from our world to your Cain, but it's very hard for physical beings like gods and goddesses to go between your Cain and Cain. The walls are just too hard. And the Infernals, they live for souls. They eat souls. That's what they want. And Cain has a literal smorgasbord of souls for them to devour. Now, they didn't have a way into this until a few centuries later. We get to the Orgoth occupation, where Western Immerman was invaded by these dark warriors called the Orgoth. And now, during this occupation, there were a lot of rebellions, but two events happened that changed the fortunes for the humans fighting this war. It first was the gift of magic, where humans certainly start learning and gaining the ability to use magic. And then came the development of Mechanica, the fusion of science and technology, which eventually led to warjacks. Now, for a long time, no one knew exactly how it is that humans just suddenly started learning magic. We learned from the Hermit of Henschel that during the occupation, the twin gods, Marl and Thamar, saw what was going on and realized that humanity wasn't going to survive this. Thamar went to her brother and said, Marl, look into the future, what's going to happen? And Marl was like, yeah, the future's not good for us, we're kind of boned. We don't know, even if we intervene, even if we get Menoth and the worm to join in on this, humanity in Western Imran is boned. So she thought, okay, what if we gave humanity the ability to use magic? And he's like, that's kind of hard for us because cosmologically humans can't learn magic. I mean, we ascended, but they can't learn magic like that. So she began using her agents in Cain to try to sniff around and find a loophole to get humans to learn magic. She even sent some to the Iosian elves, and they were like, fuck off, we don't want to mess with you. But then, from their records, she learned of the existence of the Infernals. So she went to the Infernals in the Abyss, the realm beyond your Cain, and encountered the Nunna-Korean order, because the Infernals are not a single unified faction. There are many orders and many cabals and stuff like this. So she went up to them and said, okay, we need to, what would it take for you can you give humans the right to use magic? And they were like, we can do this, but it is going to cost you. And she's like, what do you want? And so they said, we want 2/3 of all human souls on Imran. 2/3. Keep in mind, there are millions of people, humans in Imran, amongst the Iron Kingdoms. And they were like, okay, I can pay that, but I need to know magic. They need to know magic right now. It's like, what more can you offer? And so Thamar was like, okay, am I searching for ways to use, for humans to use magic? I know where the divine court are. I know where they are, and you can have them. And so the order were like, okay, that just sweetened the pot. We've been thirsty for them motherfuckers for years. All right, you got yourself a deal. So, after this, the order went to work, and boom, the first human wizards, the gift of magic, happens. And while they're doing this, they find the divine court. And they found them in a realm where the barriers between Kane and Urkane were the weakest. They went there because this was the one place that they could probably jump over to Urkane back home, and the Infernals jumped them. Now, they fought their asses off. The Divine Court fought their asses off, but between being diminished by staying in Kane for so long, as well as the numbers of just being outnumbered by the Infernals, they got wholesalely slaughtered. There were only two survivors, Nicaur and Skyra. Now, Nicaur wanted Skyra to be the new leader of the Divine Court, but they unfortunately lost the mantle of their leader, and both of them kind of were the only survivors of that battle. Nicaur was frozen and somehow ended up in the hands of the Khadorans up north. And we now know Skyra is still unconscious in Ios. So the Retribution put it together that they weren't sure if they kind of figured out that the humans learning magic is in some way connected to what happened to their gods. They don't know the full truth of it. They just know that there's a connection. So all that was said, but Mar and Thamar knew that eventually, sometime, some way, they were going to have to pay up. And they were spending years trying to figure out a way to, like, you know, trying to mitigate either mitigate how many souls that they need to pay for the price, or another way just negate the pain altogether. And they were just trying to negotiate with them for this, but the Infernals were like, no, we want our souls. We want the souls that were promised us. And so fast forward to this book that you've seen on the screen right now called Iron Kingdom, called Warmachine Oblivion. And it details the events that lead up to what is now known as the Claiming. And as I've mentioned in previous live streams, the Claiming was an apocalyptic event where all the different factions and different nations and different kingdoms of Warmachine fought together to face off against an invasion of these eldritch abominations. It was a bloody battle, and in this book it details the things that led up to the eventual arrival of the invasion, of the Claiming, where there were agents in all the kingdoms, all servants of the Infernals. And this is where I'll be reading first. Now, the next part, it will be called the Hingehold Scrolls, which were they weren't official media that was released into like books from Privateer Press. They did it piecemeal by releasing little segments of it on their Twitter, and they were codified into a single document called the Hingehold Scrolls. And they just jump around from faction to characters, and it jumps around at the start and the middle and towards the end of the Claiming. And it basically chronicles the entire event. I've read it a couple of times. It's still some crazy shit. So this is what we're going to be reading tonight. So there are a lot of characters you recognize, some you might not, but basically no one saw this shit coming. So this is not going to be pretty. So if you're listening to this, sit back, grab something to eat, grab something to drink, because we're in for this for a while. I'm not sure how long I'll go, but I'll see how I'm feeling. So. All right. This first part we'll be chronicling the movements of the Hermit of Hingehold. In case you didn't know, the Hermit of Henchhold is actually a member of the is an Iosan elf who was part of a group called the Seekers, who were trying to find clues to the missing Iosan elves. In case you need to know, the name Seekers, Lady Ayana of the Talon Charter is a Seeker. So they're part of the same order. And unfortunately, the Hermit, his name, he's since cast aside the name, figured out the truth and knew what was coming, and he's just been going around to these kingdoms trying to convince people to take his shit seriously. So this will just be detailing that. So let's just get right into it. The date is spring 612 AR in the Gnarls. All right. If you're ready, let's get down to business. Leaning upon his staff with his eyes closed, Horla Doomshaper reached with his mind to the dire trolls along the length of the half-constructed wall. They did not wish to be here, their small minds churlishly pulling against his own, focusing instead on the rumbling hunger in their bellies. They wanted to rend and kill, to eat. He clamped down on their petulance and reached with his gigantic hands as if they were his own, seizing the heavy stones and hauling them into place. Dozens of kin scrambled along the wall with hammers and chisels, setting the stones into place as battlements came into being. A throat cleared behind him, but he already knew she was there. He had ignored two such attempts to draw his attention. His eyes still closed, he snapped, "What, Calandra? Can't you see are you that eager to see the stoneworkers of Clan Skalash devoured by frenzied dire trolls?" Calandra said, "I have no fear of that. Keeping them in line while having a conversation with a visitor is no difficult for one such as you." There was no obvious sarcasm in her tone, but Doomshaper knew she was taunting him. There was something in her manner that reminded him of his eldest daughter. With a heavy sigh, he turned, opening his eyes to glare balefully at the two individuals standing before him. Calandra's flame entirely encompassed the anemic figure next to her. For the first time, he focused on this visitor, realizing with a frown that he had not even sensed this man's approach. He was scrawny, possibly human, with a stained robe hanging loosely from sharp bones. He was most notable for an extremely long beard that nearly reached the ground. The beard covered most of his face, the rest covered in a hood. There was something odd about him, and not simply his appearance. No, not human, Doomshaper decided. An elf. One more withered, aged, and generally harrowed than Doomshaper had ever seen before. He looked like someone who had been a prisoner for centuries and was just let out of his dungeon into the sun. Slung across his back by a leather strap was a sizable scroll case, similar in proportions to some of the larger ones Doomshaper himself possessed. The ancient elf was bowed by his burden, bending forward, his frame barely able to sustain his weight. "Who is this?" Doomshaper asked. The eyes peering at him from under the hood seemed almost empty, devoid of the vital spark of life. And if the visitor were capable of mustering arcane power, Doomshaper could barely sense it. It was almost as though he were a walking absence. "I have no name worthy of saying aloud," the elf said in perfect Mulgur Thrall, as if he had been born to the tongue. "I am simply a hermit." Calandra interjected, "I've been having a number of disturbing divinations of late, of every form. Cards, thrown bones, dice castings, all doom and gloom. It's been puzzling me. And this hermit came to me, and he spoke of things he should not know. I think he has the gift of foresight." "Divination is always unreliable," Doomshaper said, though he gave the elf another appraising look. "Why have you come to me?" "I have little choice in the matter," the hermit said morosely. "I have come to speak of a maelstrom, a tide of unending darkness about to crack its way into the world. Locusts will descend upon the greatest cities of mankind, and in that hour the very world will stand at the precipice of ruin. This first gate is the keystone, and its opening will unlock a dozen more. The claiming is at hand. You try my patience, Doomshaper growled at him. Why must every self-entitled prophet babble in riddles? Speak plainly or not at all. The Iosin looked back at him with a pained expression. Calandra put her hands at her waist and said, You've been known to be mysterious from time to time yourself. Visions aren't always easy to explain. You've had your share. Meanwhile, the hermit murmured beneath his breath. The claiming will seize the claiming will seize 2 souls in 3. The power the immortal parasites will reap from this is beyond measure. Our reality will bend under the weight of their footsteps. They are knocking at the door, and it is about to open. We are all betrayed. Doomshaper kept his attention focused on Calandra. What is this interpretation of both his words and of your own allegories? You think this is just nonsense? He's likely a bit crazy, Calandra admitted, but I do think something is happening. Talk of gates and shadows could be a Crixian plot, perhaps involving Banes, but I think we're looking at something larger. He has spoken of souls being claimed. I do not know a great deal about infernals, as they have never much troubled our people, but that would be my guess. He suggests Caspia as the place of imminent threat. Some gateway opening there, bringing down its doom and its inhabitants. Caspia and its people doomed? Doomshaper considered this and uttered a dark chuckle from under his breath. Good riddance to all of them. Calandra frowned. We have never had to deal with infernals. I cannot say I know much about them, but everything I've heard about them is bad. They are a threat to be taken seriously. The shaman of the Gnarls glared at both Calandra and the hermit, feeling distinctly as though they were seeking to manipulate him, as though he would be frightened by vague prophecies. He said, There's a reason we not have not to deal with them. They are a human problem, not one that troubles the kid. This is far more than a human problem, the hermit said with great clarity. The locusts will come to the mountains and the forests when the farmlands of man are consumed. They will seek the souls of all. You could act now to prevent this first opening act of the way. His tone, without an emphasis and devoid of any energy, suggested he did not entirely believe it. Doomshaper stepped closer to the frail elf, who stood placidly as if unaware or uncaring that the Trocan elder could annihilate him with a single blow of his staff. What would you have us do? March an army to Caspia to save the humans from themselves? How would they welcome us with their walled gates, even were we inclined to do this favor? They would ask us with rifles and cannons, why did you come here instead of going to them? If your forewarnings are needed. What game are you playing, hermit? It is no game. I go many places and speak to all who will listen. What you do is your choice. I have no choice for myself. I play the role set out for me, as do we all. I warn, you fail to listen, and darkness encompasses us all. I've had enough, Doomsaber snarled. To Calandra, he said, As he is your guest, I will leave it to you to see him off. Were it not for ancient guests' courtesies, he might have handed the hermit to one of his hungry dire trolls. She looked abashed as she took hold of the hermit's elbow and led him away. Doomshaper knew she had brought him with the best of intentions. Though a talented augur, she put too much faith in her cards. The future was always in flux, and regardless of fell omens, Doomshaper did not intend to take credit or blame for any looming disaster falling Caspia. It was not his concern. He struggled enough to protect the kin of the Gnarls as well as the other regions, with Ironhide and his closest ally so far away. The hermit did not appear to bothered by this send-off. He said, I will return to you again anon when the locusts descend. You may welcome me then. All right, take your time, Devil. I'll still be here. All right. Next part. Months later, in Caspia, Arcane Administrator Oren Midwinter strode quickly through the halls of Castle Routhorn, almost stumbling in his haste to return to his chambers and the warded inner sanctum where his true work was conducted. Just hours before, he had concluded a meeting with the War Master General, the King, and several other high-ranking officers and officials regarding military matters. There, he had been forced to feign interest in their deliberations regarding the ongoing war in Lael. Nothing could be further from his mind or seem less significant now. All was of the necessary events for that conflict had been staged, the ground laid for orchestrating precisely the sort of carnage in the exact right places for his masters to benefit. He was tired of such subtleties and eager for the next phase, where he could cast aside all illusions and take his proper place, his deserved place, so long denied him. It had not been simple or easy, his handling of these matters in the last few years, particularly given the relative unimportance of his position in court. From the outside perspective, it may seem as though he had singular access to the king, and that was partially true, yet this was not allowed him to accomplish his goals easily. Nothing had gone as he hoped. His masters did not appreciate the tightrope he walked for them, moved too quickly, say the wrong word, and he could have been revealed and cast out, likely even incarcerated and even executed. There had been a close call not too long ago, when he had been forced to sacrifice a man who had introduced him to his masters. A necessary loss, but one that gave him the access he required. He had been forced to work indirectly, through subtler manipulations. His masters had grown impatient, and he had sensed their lack of satisfaction with his progress. Only his proximity and friendship to King Julius had prevented his replacement. Arranging a proxy in his place would have not been readily accomplished, not at this late juncture. Still, there were so many unexpected obstacles, least among them the will and unyielding mind of King Julius himself. Young though he was, he had shown himself to be no simple pawn of fate, no easily handed upstart who had just happened to have royal blood flowing through his veins. Whatever their flaws and peculiarities, the members of the Routhorn line, even their bastards, had proven to be headstrong. They preferred to tug at the strands of fate rather than be pulled by them. Midwinter sealed his outer door and took a moment to lay on the heavily rune-inscripted narrow steel plate across the floor just aside, closing a conduit link with the others set along the perimeter of the wall. There was a bright spark as it set in place. He felt a thrum beneath his feet. Thus protected, he used the key around his neck in conjunction with a hidden switch on the wall next to his bed to open a narrow alcove that led to a private chamber. This was not his primary workshop and laboratory, which was located elsewhere in the castle, but it served as for special projects where he could not trust even his most loyal and compromised subordinates. It was here he could make direct contact with his masters. He pulled the cloth off the square table at the center of the room, revealing a surface inlaid with a complex pattern of geometrical shapes and inscribed glyphs. He opened a drawer beneath and withdrew a heavy object wrapped in cloth, unwinding it to extract a large and dark-faceted crystal, which he had set in a brass stand set upon the center of the table's geometric configuration. He used a thin knife to cut his palm and let droplets fall upon the surface, igniting a pulsing red light from deep within. There was an immediate fluttering in his stomach, an uncomfortable nausea followed by an intense, acrid odor. But the most unpleasant part of the sensation, one he could never acclimate for, was the feeling of his soul yanked forward, as if trying to pry itself free from his body. Tendrils of darkness moving like smoke gathered above the crystal and took a vague humanoid shape. one that stared back at him with inhuman eyes. Midwinter cleared his throat. I greet you with all humility and tremble before you, my master Agathon, who is also Ashoth, Arithphon, and Clyphilion. In speaking your names, know that I voice a prayer and a vow that renews my commitment. I stand ready to serve at your whim. The voice that answered back felt directly in his mind, arriving with a clarity that was both piercing and painful. How transpire your efforts? Is it all as it must be? The most vital aspects of the work are complete. The defiled keystones are in place. The palace wards are entirely compromised, and the gate's framing is built. A few small aspects of the final surface glyphs are unfinished, held back as they could be noticed by perceptive witnesses. This will be done last, just before the tenuous alignment. Also, the Caspian garrison that has not been replenished. That will almost certainly draw attention, for I have prepared contingencies. I await your words on these final matters. You have it, Agathon said. We come to you. Do what must be done. A shiver that was both pleasure and terror traveled up Midwinter's spine. His mind felt almost torn in disbelief that the waiting was now over. I will put the last pieces in motion, he said with a dry mouth. It will take 2 weeks at most. Let your words be true, else in falsity I promise punishments beyond comprehension. With those ominous words, the dark smoke scattered and dispersed. The red light pulsing from within the crystal faded. Some nearly extinguished part of his soul quailed within Midwinter. That shivered piece of himself that's still able to feel horror for what he had brought, at the result of the choices he made years ago in desperation, motivated at the time by what he viewed as loyalty to his true king, a man now long dead. How his life had changed since then. He knew himself of those days would not recognize him as he is now. Then again, he had been mad. It had been comforting, that madness. Midwinter had often accused the Inquisitor, Wilkes Quinn, who had repaired his mind, restoring unwanted and unsought clarity. Even as Quinn had rebuilt Midwinter's fragmented mind, he had layered compulsions and obligations, ones that had forced Midwinter along a certain path, creating loyalties as strong as steel, binding him to Julius. Bonds that could only be shorn and torn away later by Midwinter's infernal masters. Because of this, he had nearly failed them, having conspired in the death of Ventur Routhorn, the exiled king the Order had hoped to restore to the throne, knowing his bloodthirsty nature would suit their needs. In the aftermath, Midwinter had persuaded them that their goals could still be accomplished, that King Julius could also serve if he had adopted a different approach. The necessary wars could still happen. Midwinter had been instrumental in urging a more aggressive Signar, one that could push boldly into Lael to rectify old wrongs. The gambit had worked, in some respects even better than expected. The Khadorans had played their part as well, particularly in the annihilation of Eisenberg. Many other strands had required pulling, including those tugged by Midwinter's counterparts in rivaling nations. Even now, Midwinter did not breathe easily, knowing failure could cost him more than just his life. He closed the inner chamber and left to visit the castle's royal telegraph station. The hour was quite late, and the stormsmith specialist assigned to this desk looked bored. He was startled by the arcane administrator's sudden appearance. The only telegraphs sent or received at this hour were emergency transmissions. Midwinter handed him a slip of paper and said, "Send this to Eastwald at once, to the attention of General Alan Runewood, Archduke of the Eastern Midlands." Blinking sleepily, the operator sat up straight in his chair. Of course, He squinted at the header of the paper and then said hesitantly, "This is designated Umbral. I'm not familiar with that." There's no reason you would be. He'll understand. This is a top secret exchange. I need you to omit adding this transmission to your log by my authority. The operator swallowed. I'm not supposed to send messages with unfamiliar designations, and I believe omitting an entry into the log requires a written approval from a CRS officer. Midwinter gave him a cold look, considering his luck of running into perhaps the only Stormsmith operator fresh out of training who paid attention to the fine print of his regulations. Do you really want me to wake up your superior officer at this late hour to explain why a junior specialist is defying a member of the King's Inner Council? This is an urgent matter. Feel free to check in the morning, but this message needs to be sent now. The operator's will quelled. After a slight hesitation, he nodded and turned back to his station. He clicked on the controls with the trembling fingers as he spoke, large sparks leaping between metal nodes above him. Alright, in case you didn't know who that was Orin Midwinter, who was an Inquisitor serving under the tyrannical Ventor Ralthorn IV, the tyrant king of Signar. At this point in the story, at this point in the lore, Ventor is actually dead, and the guy that's on the throne right now, Julius, is his bastard son. Don't worry, unlike his father, Julius isn't a piece of shit. So yeah. All right. Speaking of Eastwall, that's where we're going next. In the highest tower of Signar's greatest eastern fortress, its lord and master sat at his desk with a piece of parchment crumpled in his hand, while he contemplated the utter ruin of his life. He thought of past glories, now reduced to bitter dust, of stalwart companions left behind in blood and mud, but having perished, knowing that they served well and would be honored in death. Now it had come, at last, the action that he had been dreading and avoid contemplating, the moment he would perform treason. The door opened and one of his senior adjutants entered. Major Lane Fairway asked, "How can I assist you, General?" "We will shortly be receiving a large number of soldiers from Caspia. It's going to get rather crowded here. A sizable portion of the city's garrison will be our guests. We need to find a way to make room for them and make the appropriate preparations for food and resupply. Until we work out the details, it'll be hard tack for many. It'll be important for the office to participate as well to avoid a resentment." "I do like my bacon in the morning," Major Fairway said with an exaggerated frown. This is sudden. What's this all about?" "Combined military exercises and maneuvers with elements of the Second Army to foster mutual cooperation and interalliance." The general waved his hand dismissively. I expect preliminary is to make the Protectorate's border patrols jumpy, and particularly to cause unease at the Tower of Judgment." Fairway smiled. "Well, that will never do. That would be never hard to do." "Very well, I'll see it handled. If you could give me some more precise numbers, I'd appreciate it. I'll start claiming the space for our guests." She turned to go, and he stopped her before speaking again. "Oh, and I'll be heading to Caspia shortly myself, to discuss the matters with the General Halstead and the War Master. If you could send someone to prepare my horse and the smallest possible escort, that would be appreciated. Fast horses for all of us." "You don't want me with you?" No, I need you to oversee the preparations here. I'll take Upton. Once I'm there, I should be able to wire back the numbers you need. I'll get a list of officer names as well." With she gone, his Morse thoughts returned once more. Even this was not yet treason. No, what would come next would cross that line, ordering the men and women sworn to defend their nation to leave a city just before its hour of need. In doing so, countless innocent lives would be lost, their souls ravaged and stolen. He was about to be party to the potential ruination of his country. Selfishly, he could not ignore this. Selfishly, he could not ignore how this also meant ending of a career of uncompromising service with shame. He paced. As he crossed in front of his desk, he saw his swords on their stands near his armor. He picked up the smaller one, the ceremonial blade that was not drawn in combat but worn to be buried with a sword knight after death. The legend had it that this would allow the knight to continue to fight in Urkane. It was a symbol, one linked to a knight's honor and a desire for a worthy death. He drew the small blade from its sheath and tested its edge on his thumb. Though not made for battle, it was sharp. He eyed the flickering light of his fire along with his weapon's mirror-bright length. Despite his earlier thoughts, he knew he had already taken the first steps down this road. His first betrayal had come when he had been mortally wounded after the Battle of Farin, where he had refused to accept his own death. He should have died at the hospital tents afterwards. He had languished, suffered for weeks. It would have been a good death. It had seemed a small thing at the time to answer that whispered voice amid his fevered dreams, to beg for the chance to live and continue to serve. His miraculous recovery followed. Later, it was too late. When it was too late and they had their talons in his soul, he had bargained him further. Trying to limit harm, he squirmed and wriggled, only becoming locked tighter in their grasp. Alan Runewood, the Archduke of the East Midlands, pressed the point of his ceremonial sword against his chest, just below his sternum. He grasped the blade closer to its hilt with its gloved hands, considering the angle required to pierce his heart. A coward's end, he felt, and he hesitated for a moment, but then weighed that against the greater toll. There would be many questions, soon eclipsed by the coming darkness, and perhaps some lives would be spared, but otherwise might not have been. With sudden decisiveness, his right hand tightened on the blade, and he clasped it with his left and slammed it into himself, expecting to feel the explosion of intense pain. Instead, he felt nothing but cold. His numb fingers released, and the blade clanked to the floor. Looking down, he saw no blood on its edge or on his chest, though his tunic was torn. He stepped back and saw that he was no longer alone in the chamber. His shadow, which had been cast back away from him by the fire, had darkened and taken on form, becoming a tangible female that stood adjacent to him, her skin ashen gray and wearing peculiar armor. Her lower half, where legs should be, manifested as swirling smoke. Cold, gleaming eyes behind slits in her helmet stared back at him. A voice in his mind, clearly and almost politely. "Let us not be hasty, Alan. There is still much for you to do. Your life has value, and I cannot allow you to end it prematurely. Consider those we have agreed to safeguard and protect so long as you do as you must. It would be tragic if that protection were removed, particularly in the days to come. Consider your family, your former king. They are safe because of your contract. Focus on that. Nothing else that happened is your fault. The choices have been made. You are but an actor in it, not the author of this play." After having demonstrated so vividly the futility of resistance, the umbral reaver attached to his shadow, where it merged and faded away. Alan Runewood could feel some part of his soul dying as he accepted that they owned him, body and soul. When he left that room, he left his ceremonial blade where it had fallen, naked and discarded. Yep. Alan Runewood. I actually did a profile on him a few years back. Stalwart guy. Now, he's playing a part in a massive tragedy to come. Now let's go. Let's head over to Ios. See what the elves are up to. First, and get something to drink. She could hear the madman's nervous rambling across the clearing, his voice carrying despite being muffled by the armored bodies of the house guard soldiers that surrounded him. Based on the angry murmurs coming from the house guard, she wondered if she and her companion would arrive in time to stop them from hacking the intruder to pieces. Based on the intruder's words, she wondered if everyone, including the hooded stranger himself, would not have been better off if she simply allowed his death. "Farin is lost in the void, her mantle gone beyond reach, but mad Lisla escaped from the Veld and they met one of her children, devoured but not eaten. Our older brother is now her vassal, and the two send us protectors through the dark to light the way, he said. Enough, ordered the house guard Thane. You speak our tongue, but your words are laced with blasphemy. Be silent, or I will strike you down. Several of his fellow soldiers assented with similar emotion. If the intruder had heard the Thane's words, they only served to increase his mania. Skyra knows the truth of what I seek. I saw her sadness at being sent away at their darkest hour. I foresaw the return of Nysur long before the Eldritch profaned his vault. His restoration is itself a blasphemy, not a miracle. My eyes have seen your own death in less than the turn of a season. You were warned, said the Thane, drawing his blade and taking a sudden step towards the hooded madman. For an instant, Isaria could imagine his death vividly, though she could tell that the blade would not complete its intended action. There would be an interruption. Hold, Thane! At the sound of the voice, all gathered house guard turned to face Lord Arcanus Osanrian of the House Vire, who approached alongside Isaria. At once, the house guard soldiers stood at attention, their Thane placing the flat of his blade across his chest as a sign of deference and respect. My lords, it is an unexpected honor. If you have come because of this intruder, rest assured we have the situation under control. Of that I have no doubt, Thane Earless, said Isaria. But before you cut this man down, I was hoping we might interrogate him. If I may be so bold, my lady, I do not know what there is to be gained from him. He is clearly a madman. If he once possessed some sense, it has clearly fled him, and his tongue speaks nothing of blasphemies. I suspect his madness was prompted also by his violation of our border, as he certainly knew that we would find him. His only possession of note was this scroll case. We tried opening it, but the container seemed stuck fast. Be that as it may, we will speak to him nonetheless, said Osanian. As you wish, my lords, said Thane. When you tire of his ranting, I suggest ending his misery. He then turned and ordered his troops to spread out farther along the perimeter, protecting the two warcasters while standing respectfully a distance away. I am but a hermit, said the intruder. Most recently I dwelled in the ruins of Hedgehold, in a cursed place on Signarin's western shore. Its nature gave strength to my visions. I have given up my quest, but in dreaming I have found the answers I long sought. To my dismay, Isaria looked at the strange man's countenance. There was no doubt he was Iosan, even if his attire and bearing suggested a starved outcast in worn rags. His long beard was almost comical in length, yet there was a weight and sadness in his eyes that she almost found arresting. Also a strange emptiness there. Most curiously to her eyes was a strangeness in the flow of magic around him, as though it slowed and shifted and then veered away from his proximity. He seemed both powerful and powerless. My guess is he, or at least was, part of the Seeker sect, said Ossian, as he held his arm towards the hermit, glowing runes of time and probability swirling around his wrists and palm. But everything about him seems wrong. Even the passing of time is peculiar around him. Isaria did not respond to this, though it mirrored her own observations. She addressed the intruder instead. What is your purpose here, hermit? I am to deliver the truth. I took the path beyond the Gate of Thorns as a shortcut to my destination, though at the moment I cannot rightly recall where that destination lay. I had forgotten that misted maze. His gravelly voice trailed off at the end. And what did the truth reveal to you? She asked. She had, by the power of her mind, lifted the scroll case and brought it nearer to her, letting it spin before her. He watched her as if unconcerned while she used her magic and her special sight along its sides, seeking to pry it open. It should have required no effort to do so, but it felt slippery to her mind. Not warded in a traditional sense, but there was no question that some magic kept it sealed. She frowned and tightened her mental grip, seeking to force it open by sterner applications of torque, but it simply spun faster. She felt a small spike of pain in the back of her mind. "It is not for you," he said, then sheepishly asked, "May I please have my scroll case back?" She let it drift gently to him, and he slung it again over his shoulder, slumping under its weight. If you will give us the message, if you not give us the message, then will you tell us who you mean to deliver it to?" asked Osin. The hermit then turned to the Lord Arcanist, a look of distant recognition gripping his face. "If you had acted sooner, if you had not doubted yourself and heeded the portents of time and fate you saw that night, you would have reached the farther before the Eldritch." Isaria saw Osin's posture stiffen in disbelief. "What did you say?" "You might have preserved his vault and brought him intact to she who slumbers, but the mantle of ages would have been restored, and she could have been crowned in stars, encompassing all seasons, and given what was required to stir the seeds of divinity and thaw even winter's grasp. A new divine court might have been born, new gods to awaken to a new age. The name Osanin of the House of Ire would have resounded in legend. Instead, your glory was stolen by the one-eyed falcon. Alas, failure and grief are the lot of our people. Perhaps there is no changing this past, just as I cannot change the future." Ocean stepped forward towards the hermit, voice shaking. "What is the meaning of these words? Who are you?" At that moment, the trio heard the sound of armored horses approaching the clearing. Isaria saw them, a group of mounted Fane knights. At their fore rode Skirin Isian. "My lords," he said, "pardon the intrusion, but we must take custody of that individual. He's been summoned for an audience." Isaria felt somewhat dazed, an unusual sensation. Her mind was still tracing over the last words the hermit had said, the ones that had struck Lord Oyasin as a physical blow. It might be nonsense, but she didn't think so. An audience with whom? "The Arculent Velian," said Skelly Isilin, naming the council of priests who were allowed in Skyra's presence. Isaria's eyes widened. Ocean made a startled noise. She said, "You can't mean to take him to the heart of the Fane?" "They asked to speak with him," Skedarev said in a tone that suggested he had trouble believing his own words. "And not just the Arclurians." He gave a significant look to convey his meaning. Isaria looked back at the hermit, whose expression had not changed at all. "You are given a singular honor," she said somewhat sharply. The hermit shook his head. "Brother Winter and Sister Spring will not like to hear my words any more than you have to." And yeah, in case you didn't know, when she said Brother Winter and Sister Spring, that's Nisor is the elven god of winter, and Skyra is the elven god of spring. And the crown of stars was the mantle of the leader of the divine court. Now, the mantle itself, there was a theory that if Skyra had been allowed to take the mantle, she would have been named the new leader of the divine court, and she could have actually birthed a new generation of gods for the Iosans to believe in, but they all died, save for her and Nisor. So yeah, as you can see, things are getting really strange and apocalyptic. So now we're going back to Caspia 2 weeks later. Remember what Midwinter said? 2 weeks. 2 weeks have passed. Lord High Chancellor Leto Routhorn opened the door with a scowl, prepared to dress down whoever had the temerity to pound on it like they were trying to break down the door in the middle of the night. His angry expression turned to confusion when he beheld Constance Blaze, Knight of the Prophet, in her full armor and with a worried expression on her face. Just behind her, the storm guard who monitored his chambers were watching anxiously, and one ducked his head apologetically. "She said it was urgent, my lord." Of course. Will you come in, Constance?" His mind still half fogged by sleep, his gesture for her to enter. "No, I cannot, your majesty. There is not time." She seemed flustered, which was unusual. "Don't refer to me like that, please. I'm no longer king." Her cheeks turned red. Of course. I'm sorry. Please. We have to hurry. We need to get King Julius at once. I fear he might be in danger." That served to bring Leto to full alertness. The storm guard behind him also tensed. "Very well, let's go. Explain yourself as we walk. What sort of danger are we talking about?" "It's difficult to express, and it might be nothing, but I do not think so. I have learned to trust my visions and my instincts." At a moment's hesitation, Leto grabbed his sword from the stand near the door and belted it on, but did not otherwise take time to change. He was wearing his sleeping clothes and a thick robe that he had pulled on after the pounding at his door had brought him from his sleep. At his signal, the two storm guards came with them. They walked in a quick pace to the darkened halls. Should we sound the general alarm?" one of the storm guard asked. "Not yet, but stand ready," he told them, then looked at Constance. "I have been visited by an Archon," she said without preamble, a statement remarkable enough that it almost stopped him in his tracks. The House of Archons was the very will of Moro, most often sent to deliver prophetic messages. "Please go on." "I am no expert in such matters, but it was an ominous display. The Archon was attired in full readiness for battle, wearing heavy armor and bearing a weapon in his right hand. I could see it was bleeding from a wound at his side. What looked to be a Signarin crown fell from his fingers on his left hand, and it clattered to the floor. Then it seemed to stumble and vanish." "Very alarming indeed," Leto said. He could not help but think of Primarch Aurelius, his great friend, who would have known precisely what to make of such omens. He had passed on to join the host. It occurred to Leto that it may very well have been Aurelius's manifesting as the Archon that came to visit Constance. What did the wound represent? Constance continued. "I felt at once that Julius must be in peril. I cannot explain the certainty, but you may know that I've had visions before, and they have proven accurate, if not always easy to decipher. I came to you at once, since I know you're perhaps the only one in the castle who could check on him without too much delay. I've nothing to go on, but so I would expect the royal guard to not heed me. But this was no simple dream." "I believe you," Leo said solemnly. He had seen too much in his life to distrust the evidence of the hand of the divine. Constance Blaze was a true and upstanding warrior of the prophet. In battle, she channeled Moro's holy light. "There's been some unusual developments around here in the last few weeks, some odd miscommunications and mishaps, though nothing I would say represents an actual danger to anyone in the castle." Leto's chambers were not far from the royal suite where Julius slept. The king's outer doors were flanked by two pairs of royal guards standing in formal alertness like statues, their helmets turned to watch those approach. Yet Leto felt a tingling at the back of his neck as they did not move forward to intercept or challenge those who approached. The resemblance to those two statues was uncanny. "We need to wake the king," Leto said to the nearest one. The soldier did not move or react. It was as though the man were mute, paralyzed. All of them looked peculiar, as if washed in shadow. The hall's ghastly lamps seemed to fall on them without proper illuminating them. The storm guard behind Leto muttered and grabbed their halberds tightly. Leto grit his teeth and went past them, Blaze at his side. They could see what happened, what looked to be a yellow simmering light through the cracks of the door, suggesting movement. An illumination in the chamber. Leto took hold of the handle and yanked, but found the door stuck fast. For a moment he leaned his head against the surface, letting him hear rhythmic chanting. "Something's happening in there," he said, turning to Blaze. "Step away, my lord," she said, her sun spear in hand. She was one of the very few individuals who could be trusted to walk these halls armed, and Leto was glad for that disposition. Her weapon glowed with power, and there was a flash of light as it struck the door near the lock, shattering the door frame and sundering its surface. It had been heavily reinforced door, but her weapon was built to pierce warjack armor. She kicked the sundering door and forced her way with Leto close by on her heels, his sword drawn. The chamber was lit by a strange glow, casting pale and sickening light across an unusual scene. Julius was sitting up in his bed, his back unnaturally straight, his eyes staring dead ahead and rolled back into his head. More of the strange light gleamed in those orbs. Dark spectral forms swirled in a cyclone around the edges of the room, separating and reforming like clouds of shadow. Standing at the brightest point with his staff in hand and chanting unfamiliar words was Orin Midwinter, though he looked different from before. He wasn't wearing his arcane administrator robes, and instead was adorned in more sinister garb decorated with black glyphs. His posture no longer stooped, and his presence felt larger and more powerful. Even untrained in magic as he was, Leto could feel vast forces flowing through the room, making his hair on his arms stand on end. A ringing sound like a wind in a storm joined Midwinter's chants. "Midwinter, stop!" he commanded, uncertain if it was safe to attack him. "What's he doing to Julius?" "He's trying to ensorcel the king!" Blaze cried out over the chanting. The Morrowind warcaster gripped her bladed spear in both hands and stepped forward. A bright and pure silver light collected before her, as if drawn from her very gleaming armor and the glow of her sword. It became a spear too bright to look upon directly. This launched forward at Midwinter and exploded with radiance. Leto looked away, shielding his eyes, but was almost blinded. Midwinter groaned in pain, and the sound of the gathering wind dispersed. Looking back, Leto saw Midwinter stagger back, his staff on his hand. Julius slumped in his bed, and the strange light in his eyes left him. He had his hand to his temple and was shaking his head, groaning. Orin Midwinter glared at Constance and then at Leto, and he said, "It would have been a mercy if you had let me finish, but it is of no consequence. I sought to spare him witnessing of what was to come. You cannot prevent their arrival. My masters are summoned. You can either kneel to serve or be destroyed." Blaze stepped forward, her weapon leading, demanding, "What masters? Who do you serve? Drop your staff and surrender." His expression suggested a calm certainty without a hint of fear or anger. He said, "You will soon meet them." There was a flicker of black like a seam opening up into night, and Midwinter was gone. Coldness filled the room, frosting a nearby window. Leto moved to the young king, even as the storm guard had also rushed into the room, their weapons ready. They were followed by the formerly frozen members of the royal guard, who seemed to have been released from whatever had held them. Leto placed a hand on the king's shoulder and gave a small shake. Julius, are you all right?" I think so, the king said, sounding slightly groggy. "What's happened?" It's a strange dream." Their conversation was interrupted as the entire room jolted sharply, and they heard a loud rumble. Leto was almost knocked off his feet, but managed to grab hold of a banister to steady himself. One of the guardsmen was knocked down, while the others were all wavered. A great tremor had rocked the castle. They could hear the sounds of stone groaning and the distinct sounds of panic. Leto stared and shared a look with Constance, and they moved at once to find a greater source of the problem. Julius was already scrambling to ready himself, assisted by servants who had hurried to the room to check on him. He called for his armor and his sword. Leto whispered to Blaze, "What do you think that was?" He already knew the answer. "A gateway," she said after swallowing once. "Infernals. It has come to be. An infernal gate has opened inside Castle Routhorn." And yep, now we have reached it. The claiming has officially begun. And for refresher's sake, Leto Ralthorn, the High Chancellor, is actually the former king. He's actually the younger brother of Venture Ralthorn, the Tyrant King, and he's the uncle of the current king, Julius Ralthorn. So he's an advisor, but he's no longer a king. But yeah, his warnings fell on deaf ears, so now I've got to skip ahead to get to the second part of the story in this book. It's mostly just, and this particular book mostly just has a bunch of scenarios and gameplays. All right. This official part of the story is called, this entire part of the story I've been reading is called Rendered into Ashes. That was part one. This is part two. All right. Excuse me. Return back to Caspia. Bodies lay strewn across what had once been a placid and beautiful garden. Blood soaked into the verdant lawn and soaked the roots of carefully groomed hedges and flower beds. Cultists in dark robes were scattered around the courtyard, their faces obscured behind metal masks, engaged in either the final preparations or standing guard at the 3 garden entrances. Several cultists pulled bodies out of the way, paying little regard to the dignity of the dead. Those more certainly centrally gathered in the courtyard focused their attention on the largest framework gateway, now inscribed with an assortment of mystical glyphs. Ordinarily, it would serve as the grand opening to the garden through which ceremonial processions might march. A number of weddings and other joyful celebrations had taken place in this garden in the past. Here, Caspia's elite could prove they were friends of the royal family by impressing their peers with lavish spending amidst the singular surroundings of Castle Ralthorn. Now it stood in the center of what aspired to be the gravest atrocity in Western Emerald since the arrival of the Orgoth. Next to the grand entranceway, several new fixtures have been installed, darkened crystal set with bronze stands, each pulsing with deep reddish light, a sinister illumination of the product of the souls they had captured of those who had been sacrificed nearby. They were primed to collect many, many more. Around each was an unnaturally darkened area of tendrils of living shadow that seemed to move of their own accord. The intensity of these pools had dramatically increased, together with a deep sound almost too low to be heard that brought with it a vibration through the soles of their feet. The highest ranking cultists had gathered before the entryway and began to chant in low tones, their blades held before them, speaking words in a forgotten tongue that each had carefully memorized and practiced. Orin Midwinter appeared them amid a cloud of dissipating smoke. His expression was grim, and he ignored the gestures of obsolescence from the cultists not already engaged in the ritual. "This happens now," he said sharply, glancing towards the other entrances as if expecting to see armed soldiers at any moment. He raised his staff and joined the intonations as a red glow surrounded his form. In front of him, the glyph-inspired archway shimmered and became hazy. Heat radiated from it in tangible waves, followed by pulses of similarly intense cold. All those present felt a pressure in their minds, joined soon by one of their eardrums in their eardrums and chests, as if they were driven deeply into the pool of water. The garden's archway doubled their vision and blackened before changing utterly, becoming dark stone. In a moment, it transformed into a gateway of alien architecture, no longer a delicately carved piece of human decoration. It had become a roughly hewn piece of basalt torn from a volcanic landscape. Lit from within, its inner surfaces rigid and scaled as if they were the hide of some grotesque living thing. As the glow of Midwinter's staff increased, a rippling sheet of utter blackness sprang into being in the space between the two sides of the gateway. The darkness shimmered like a liquid, and from it stepped a pale being whose hooded face, with its white skin, stood in a sharp relief against the black. This was a greater Infernal Curator. The sense of power and intelligence radiating from the being was enough to make even Midwinter tremble. Great and powerful Agathon, Midwinter said, who is also known to me as Ashtoth, Araphon, and Clysiston, we greet and welcome you. Please take pity on those of us who inherit the reality shaped by your formidable will. Your loyalty and service will be rewarded, Agathon's voice intoned, speaking directly to his mind. He stepped away, allowing the greater being to pass, even as the darkness split, and other more horrific creatures began to step through, one after the next, each of them more painful to look upon them with mortal eyes. The cultists had given them wide berth, and those who had been watching for approaching guards gave up that task, as it no longer mattered. The infernals had come. Anyone foolish enough to stand in their way would perish, their souls forfeit. The safest place in Western Emerald had quickly turned into bedlam. Grandmaster Gabriel Thorne barked orders as he spurred his horse ahead, seeking to get to the heart of the conflict so he could assess the situation. For the first time since Caspia had been invaded by the armies of the Protectorate of Menoth, the martial might of the Church of Morrow had been deployed in the force in the streets of the City of Walls. The Sanctium had sent an alert to all ranking officers, looking first to its own protection and then to the larger city beyond. The Order of Illumination had already been in motion. Its mystically attuned vigilant peers had been immediately discerned that something terrible was happening in Castle Rowthorn. Something unnatural was emitting rhythmic ripples of shadow and darkness. To those with any sensitivity of magic and the unseen, black clouds of violent tint had gathered above the heart of the city. The air was torn by the howl of tormented souls, and yet even to the ungifted something was clearly wrong, and the air choked with acrid stenches. Everywhere people walked, their shadows twisted and moved of their own accord. The hot wind moving through the streets suggested a storm, its moaning overwritten by the sound of gunfire. But not enough gunfire to Gabriel's ears. He had his own excrudator pistol in one hand, his horse's reins in the other, eager to find a target. He urged his steed past the nearest barricade to where a number of vigilant and precursor knights had already engaged. Several squads of Signaran army long gunners were positioned just back from them, having taken cover where they had provided fire support. Still, with the castle so near at hand, and given the battle has begun earlier, he expected to see more soldiers. It was still hours until dawn. The darkness was broken up by the city's gas lanterns and flashes of light amidst the combatants. It was a confusing scene, and the darkness did not help, though Gabriel could make out strange bestial forms clashing with his men. The nearest vigilants fought to fend off several unholy monsters floating in the air. Each was a roughly spherical creature with a trailing clawed tentacles, surrounded by an almost obscene mouth rigged with teeth at its center. They emitted strange howling noises. Their extended tongues lashed forth. Darkness swelled around the nearest of the things, and it moved unpredictably with such surprising quickness, evading a slashing sword before one of its tendril claws tore off the arm of the man who lunged at it. He fell back, his blade clattering to the ground, still clutching his severed hand. Gabriel Thorne aimed his pistol, choosing his target carefully, and fired. His pistol emitted the flash of white light, and the blessed projectile impacted the unholy creature above its gaping maw, opening a widened tear that seemed to fall apart, becoming greasy smoke. The nearest vigilant sergeant seemed stunned to watch this transfiguration and said to Thorne, "These must be infernals. But that can't be right, can it, Grandmaster? Accept what your eyes and what other senses tell you. Do not let confusion in the search for rational explanation hinder your instincts." Thorne looked around in a quiet panic. "We are beset by infernals. Ignore your fear. You are trained and equipped to deal with these things." The Grandmaster then ordered the nearest vigilant to take the wounded man back to be tended by the priest before waving a squad of more heavily armored resolutes to shore up the front line. outfitted in heavy steam-powered armor augmented to shield them from unnatural threats. They carried oversized cannons and blades. They were barely in position before there came a strange sound like scraping metal. Amid a surge of heat and darkness, a group of bulkier, bipedal, infernal creatures rushed their position. They appeared akin to be heavily armored soldiers, except the armor was integrated with their very bodies, and their clawed arms were themselves like scything axes. As tempted as Gabriel was to lose himself in the fight, wading in with his own blade, he knew this was not his role. It was vital that they get a better sense of the overall situation and find some means to regain the initiative. The most confusing aspect to Gabriel was that the enemy seemed to be coming from the direction of Castle Ralthorn itself, which made little sense. His mind struggled to reconcile with the knowledge that there should be no place safer from such beings in the home of Signar's king and higher-ranking nobles. He could only haphazard that the foe had gained a foothold in the outer wards of the towering edifice, which was now being used as a staging area for attacks into the surrounding areas, perhaps even intending to threaten the sanctum itself. A song, like a tolling gong, and then a deep-throated growl warbled strangely, as if harmonizing with a pair of throats. A hulking brute nearly 10 feet tall emerged from the darkness and crashed into the lines of resolutes. It was difficult to make sense of the creature, which scrambled on 4 spindly spider-like legs, but had a thick muscular torso protected by segmented armor plates like a Chilton. Its wide arms ended at thorny, toothy maws instead of hands. In a singular powerful swing, this mouth claw tore through a Resolute's breastplate to feast on the flesh beneath, swallowing anything it chewed upon to disappear into the void that shimmered with radiant heat. Several of the nearest vigilants fell back in a panic, though the slain Resolute brothers in arms gave a battle yell and stood firm, bringing blessed greatswords to bear. The sound of long gunner rifles increased the tempo as a hail of bullets impacted on the advancing horrors, doing very little to slow them down. Despite their bravery, those of the vanguard buckled and were forced to fall back, dragging the wounded with them. A sudden light parted in the darkness, and a heavy clanging noise accompanied a shuddering of the ground beneath Gabriel's feet. With a shriek of venting steam, a familiar warjack barreled into the largest horror, sending it crashing into the nearest wall amid an explosion of shattered bricks and stone. The warjack was adorned with gleaming silver and bronze, its sword blazing coal blue, and the Morrowind symbol gleamed in several places as it was inscribed on its outer hull. This was Gallant, the blessed machine companion of Constance Blaze, whose silhouette was ringed in light as she fought against the horrors with sword and shield. Everywhere her sword struck, light blazed. Infernal horrors caught in that light, shrieked, and transformed into ash and smoke. A number of other prominent figures stepped through the smoke and moved to join the embattled Morians and garrison soldiers. Gabriel's eyes widened to see King Julius among them, attired in armor and with the infamous Kingslayer sword in his hand. With him came the former king, Leto Ralthorn, who was also armed. Their escorts were endeavoring to keep the royals at a safe distance from the enemy, a challenging task given both Leto and Julius were themselves focused on trying to safeguard dozens of unarmed citizens. Gabriel shouted to his men to rally and ordered an advance to support the new arrivals. He spurred his horse forward and drew his blade, striking at one of the heavy-set infernal bipeds, whose arm was like a living claymore. One of Leto's storm guard was decapitated by another, and King Julius soon retaliated with a heavy blow of his greatsword. Leto pulled a well-dressed civilian aside to skewer one of the flying horrors that had sought to lash at him. The creature's lengthy tongue wrapped around the blade of his sword while seeking the former king's hand, but it was dissolved into gray smoke. A squad of Gabriel's Resolutes reached the royal line and in good form assembled into a defensive line, backed by vigilants who had fired their blessed pistols between them. They had managed to get the refugees from the castle behind them and began to execute a fighting withdrawal into the barricades. Constance Blaze and her warjacks, Gabriel could see that she had a defender and a lancer in addition to Gallant, remained at the fore. alert to any intercepting of any horrors. Grandmaster Thorn, Leto greeted him, shouting over the din. It's good to see that you're here in our time of need. King Julius nodded his assent, breathing hard and looking haggard and pale. He said, "Your men are a service to this kingdom." Gabriel tried to smile. "Thank you, Your Majesty. We've assembled as quickly as we could. There are more knights to send from the Sanctium as they are made ready. I must admit at being at a loss as to the scope of the situation. Can you or one of your officers fill me in on the status of Castle Routhorn and its defenders?" The king shared a grim look with his uncle. "The castle is lost. There are likely still defenders fighting inside, cut off from the rest of us and war one another. We were only able to rescue a small portion of the palace staff and inhabitants." Gabriel asked, "What of Princess Caitlin?" He knew the Lali's heir had been in their keeping. "Thankfully, she wasn't in the castle last night," Julius answered. "She had her own escort, and I'm hoping they're keeping their distance. Infernalists have opened a gateway inside the castle, and from all sides it remained open. There seemed to be no end of these creatures. It's disgorging." It was a dire pronouncement, as Gabriel Thorn could remember, suggesting a disaster on a scale staggering in its implications. It also defied everything he knew about the Infernals and their limited ability to exist on Kane. They should not have been able to invade in such strength. It suggested Infernalist rituals, collaborations on an unprecedented scale, and this also implied a critical failure by his own order. Leto could see the Grandmaster was struggling to absorb this information. We were betrayed by Orrin Midwinter. That's how this was all made possible, given he had direct oversight over the castle's mystical protections. Leto and Julius exchanged another look, and this time the king looked down, his rage and humiliation at having been deceived quite evident. Gabriel had been among those many who had never trusted Midwinter, given his background as an inquisitor, though the man had managed a very convincing demeanor of having been reformed. Gabriel did not think it fair to hold the king at fault for this disaster. He said, "Our order inspected Midwinter's earlier repairs to the castle wards after that small infernal breach. Nothing seemed amiss. Whatever means he employed for this, he succeeded in fooling us all." Leto said, "We didn't witness the gate directly, but from the accounts of the Royal Guard, I believe to be Sunbright Garden in the eastern courtyard. We need to get that gate and shut it down somehow. It's a very bad sign." "Agreed," said Julius. His voice, his tone, and the way he gripped the hilt of his Kingslayer suggested he intended to rejoin the battle. Gabriel spoke in a lower tone. "Your Majesty, your safety and that of the other nobles you recover are the priority. We cannot risk your life. Word of the attack on the castle and its evacuation will spread. It is vital that the people know that you made it out." Julius opened his mouth to eject, but Leto touched his arm and nodded to show his approval of the Grandmaster's caution, though he clearly would have preferred to remain and fight. Gabriel beckoned one of his lieutenants and directed him to secure the royals and the civilians. Another half-armed noble appeared as the royals were about to depart, this one carrying a glowing storm glaive. He, too, seemed disheveled and out of sorts, and it took a moment before Gabriel recognized him. "Warmaster Ebonheart," he said, inclining his head. Though the Aura of Illumination did not answer to the Signarin chain of command, except during joint operations, he felt considerable respect for Ebonheart, a former Stormblade who had spent the majority of his life in military service. Soon after the crowning of King Julius, he had been promoted to War Master General. The head of the Signarin army returned Thorn's nod and seemed distracted, apparently intending to report to the king. King Julius halted at the sight of him. "What news of the garrison? Are they on the way?" Ebonheart's face ashened. "No, Your Majesty. I'm afraid there will be not. The majority of the Second Army was recently sent to Eastwall without my permission. It seems we were betrayed. Again." "How is that possible?" Julius and Leto said the same words practically the same time, his voice thick with emotion, suggesting the deep pain and also disbelief. Ebonheart said, "They say it was General Runewood. I can't believe it. There must be some other explanation. Regardless, We are getting little help from that quarter. Signar's War Master General turned to Gabriel Thorn. It would appear that the preservation of Caspia is in Morrow's hands. And yours, Grandmaster. Yep. I told you. This is an apocalyptic battle. And you can feel the betrayal in their hearts because, like I said, Alan Runewood was one of the good ones. He was loyal to a fault. Like, everybody liked that guy. And now to find him having turned traitor, I can only imagine. But now we move on to another. Now we're going to near the Tower of Judgment. And let's see how the Protectorate is handling this shit. The great doors of the Factorium opened, letting in a gust of desert wind. Its howling signaled the tremendous sandstorm that followed close behind. Nicia led the way. 24 Daughters of the Flame accompanying her through the immense threshold. The massive entry fell into darkness as the doors closed. The gas signs arrayed along the wall of the hallway ahead, providing just enough illumination for the visitors to find their way. I've never been this close to Tower of Judgment before, said Avara, the newest member of the Order, who, despite having suffered a great loss in her young life, always managed to retain a youthful innocence about her. They say that some of the Protectorate's worst criminals are imprisoned here. Focus, Avara! We're on a mission, hissed Kalima, a more senior and less impatient daughter. Nicia turned to order silence from the daughters, but then she heard another voice, a familiar warmth making her heart race, as though its words were too faint to be understood. Heltus? She said with a breath. Sister, are you all right? Asked Avara. Nicia did not answer. She must stay strong. The next few minutes would determine if everything she had fought for, everything that she had sacrificed over the last few months, would be worth it. They heard footsteps coming farther down the dimly lit passage. It was a small group of Exemplar, fully armored with their hands over their sheathed relic blades. A light emanated from the group's center, its warm glow a stark contrast to the glow of the hallway. The knights parted to allow the adorned figure at its center to step forward. Nicia saw the glow originate from his staff, a beautifully ornate work of blessed mechanica, sculptures blazoned around its haft, while the Melefix at its head shone the holy light. A fitting staff of authority for one of the most powerful people in the Protectorate, Visgoth Ark Rezik, overseer of the Sul Menite Arthasers. Next to him stood an Exemplar warder, whose heavier armor and consecrated shield suggested his duty as Razek's guardian. Nicia and the daughters bowed in showing deference to the Visgoth, the soft clanking of shifting metal armor signifying that the Exemplar was showing similar respects to the senior priests in their care. The Visgoth's gold and iron mask hid his features well, but his voice carried a note of annoyance. Where is the Priestess of the Flame? I was told she would be here. Nicia stepped forward and knelt to the feet of the Visgoth. She sent her apologies, Your Grace, but unforeseen matters forced her to remain in Emir. We are here to oversee the Warjack shipment in her stead. A shame. I would have had words with this priestess, said Razek. Very well. This is High Artificer Alcinir, my senior vassal and personal administrator. He will see to your logistical needs. From behind the Visgoth stepped Alcir, who wore simple, clean robes of better quality than Nicias had seen on a vassal of Menoth. His mask was gold-plated, with minor ornate patterns inscribed on it to signify his higher station. He also wore the heavy collar and chains of the slave wizards of his order. He said nothing, but inclined his head obediently. As the Visgoth turned to leave, Nicia said, Just one more thing, Your Eminence. I must apologize. Vyskov Razek turned once again and looked down at the kneeling Nicaea. Apologize for what, my child? Nicaea felt doubt. She could still turn back. Then she heard Heltis' voice in her ear, as if he was standing right on her shoulder. Just one more step, my love. Then all will be well. This is the cost. Hearing the voice of her beloved, Nicaea would never again be plagued by doubt. For this, she said as she raised her left hand, palm up, a signal to those behind her. She heard Alvaro's surprised grunt, followed by the wet gurgle of Camelia's blades piercing her back. Two other daughters also choked in their own blood as their sisters cut them down. Nicaea regretted their deaths, but those women had not loved their fallen loved ones enough to make the necessary bargains. They lacked resolve. Still, she honored the sacrifice by making their deaths swift and useful. The bloody murders had the desired effect of proving the moment of stunned inaction from both the Vyskov and his exemplars. This gave Nicaea and her accomplices the initiative. What have you? Began Razek. Nicaea, feeling the remaining 9 daughters leap past her in perfect coordination, just as planned, beset the knights as they drew their relic blades. Nicaea advanced, aiming her sword cannon directly at the Vyskov. Before she could fire, the warder moved to intercept her shot, while his blessed halberd struck with blurring speed. Nicaea dodged the blow, twisting in midair while counterattacking. Her strikes with her oversized blade sending sparks against the warder's heavy shield. Nicaea had no doubt that she could defeat the warder, but she had no time for a duel. The air shifted, and a blast of arcane energy struck the warder's back, tearing through most of his armor and knocking him prone. Both Nicaea and the Vyskov turned to face High Artificer Alshier, whose hand was aglow as he drew in more arcane power for a second magical attack. Alshier! Cried Razek, in his disbelief giving way to rage. The warder's faith and resolve had allowed him to survive the blast. Obviously dazed, he began to stand, turning to protect his Vyskov. His loyalty, she knew, would be his undoing. Nicaea aimed her sword cannon at the back of his head and fired, leaving her free to join Alshier in facing against the Vyskov. In your haste to betray me, you forget your face's true servant of the Lawbringer. You forget you face a servant of the true Lawbringer. He held his palm out and spoke a word of in ancient Caspian. The collars and chains around Alshier ignited in fiery light. The artificer was brought to his knees in searing pain, extinguishing his own arcane energies. Ark Razek turned his attention to Nicaea and her 5 remaining daughters, who were facing off against the last knight's exemplar. Both sides suffered heavy losses. Razek glared at her. Was this treason commanded by your priestess of a flame? I do not owe you an explanation, your grace, said Nicaea. I serve a higher cause. The Vyskov's mechanical staff ignited in holy fire, which he directed at her. Nicaea barely dodged the wave of flame, its heat stealing the breath from her lungs. Seeing her peril, 3 daughters broke away to lunge at the Vyskov, and their blades whirling in their hands, but their attacks failed to pierce the glowing barrier that now surrounded him. The Vyskov pointed his staff towards them and unleashed another wave of divine flame. In a breath, they were turned to ash and cinder. A shot Nicaea fired at his chest from her cannon also failed to penetrate. She would not be deterred. Her blade was already in a blur of motion as she spun in the air, bringing her blade down for a killing blow. But Razek showed his skill and reflexes by bringing his staff up to intercept, its blazing manifex mere inches from her face. It is time to end this, he said. A shame your death would be so swift. Nicaea felt a wave of resentment and bitterness at the thought of Heltius witnessing her defeat after having gone to such lengths. Then she heard the rattling of chains, and the light from the malefics was suddenly snuffed out. Razek went down to a knee, one hand grasping at his staff that had been pulled tight against his own throat by the blazing chain, his other hand raking uselessly behind him towards his attacker. Alshir leaned behind him, his chains choking his former master into a deadly embrace. For nearly 20 years you used our passions, our craft, our gifts to elevate yourself, Alshir said, his grip tightening around the chains of the Visgoth's throat. We were your pampered slaves, used to build your war machines, and all in service of a cruel god. Visgoth Razek struggled. It seemed for a moment he might pull Alshir off of him, but the Artificer kept hold. What's that, your eminence? He hissed. Are you praying? Minoth cannot hear your words. As you die, rest assured, darker gods heard my prayers. After a few more moments, the priest stopped struggling, his head going slack, the glow from his chains fading from life. Alshir quickly removed the keys from the Visgoth's corpse and unlocked his collar and manacles, which left hideous bruises and burns around the Artificer's neck and arms. He whispered, I'm free. I'm finally free, you bastard. Nicaea stood before the Artificer. Is your bargain satisfied? More than you can know. Alshir removed his own gold-plated mask. He turned to face Nicaea and the surviving daughters, then called out to the darkness behind him. Several other vassals approached, many of them covered in blood and some visible wounds. Nicaea asked, Is the complex secure? Yes, said one of the younger vassals, eyes fixed on the Visgoth's corpse. Your sisters coming through the access tunnels made short work of the rest of the Factorum's guards. We began the final sigils. We began adding the final sigils and glyphs to the main hall as instructed. Good, said Nicaea. She turned to Alshir. Where is the gate? We used the fabrication's framing for a prototype colossal. Its size and scope seemed adequate. Very well. Let us move on. One moment. Alshir unwrapped a bundle he extracted from a satchel at his side, some sort of apparatus. Killing a Visgoth is one thing, but I will not allow his soul to go to its reward in the city of man in Urkane. I was able to construct something special for this occasion. Nicaea's stomach twisted in disgust. Is that a soul cage? It serves the same function, said Alshir. As he activated the device, an ethereal glow emitted from the body of Razek. A burning orb of light became visible over the dead man. His soul, its glowing resonant of the light of his staff, reminiscent of the light of his staff. That was promptly pulled into the mechanism. Alshir closed the device and said to it, You will never know peace. Never. Nicaea could hear the sandstorm reach the compound in earnest, the entryway behind them still shaking with the fury of the sand and wind. A sudden explosion from the entryway shook the entire Factorum. Moments later, wind and sand flew down the hallway, the force of it nearly knocking her down. The wind suddenly died down enough for her to pry her eyes open. She saw Alshir screaming in pain, the soul cage in his arm glowing brightly as the chains that had been around him before. The soul cage twisted and warped itself, exploding into flame, sending the Visgoth soul rushing against the wind into the storm towards the entryway. Nicaea felt heat coming down the corridor, followed by a flood of light that was nearly blinding. The howling of the wind was drowned out by the sound akin to a holy choir, voices singing praise to the Creator from nowhere and everywhere. The light coalesced into a being of pure fire and steel, a pair of flaming wings spreading on either side. In one hand it held a flail, in the other a flaming sword, and by its armored breast rested the soul of the fallen Visgoth. That being floated towards the group. Nicaea could feel its wrath and fury, though its visage was only shapeless fire. She turned to Alshir. Take your vassals and get to work finishing the portal now! Alcea began to move. What will you do? Whatever I must, she said, as she faced, weapon drawn, the divine manifestation of the god she once worshipped. Yeah, that is an Archon. They were a new type of class introduced during in this particular story. Archons are basically direct emissaries of the gods. That was an Archon of Menoth, the creator of man. So yeah, you know it's serious when the gods themselves are getting involved. And I'm going to tell you right now, it still won't be enough. But there's some more people that we need to look into. Specifically, the Northern Wormwall Mountains. Time to see what the convergence of Cyrus is up to. The Iron Mother Directrix shone in silver and steel as she surveyed her domain deep within the gleaming heart of the Temple of the Prime Harmonic. Around her was an array of advanced apparatuses by which she could oversee the proprietary projects of the far-flung machine cult. Servitors moved briskly around Directrix, as did the spider-like forms of other proud members of the clergy who had earned the right to transcend their old bodies and take on clockwork forms. She was eager to return to the battlefield and had nearly finished assembling a new army for the next phase. Yet as much as she savored combat, she also took considerable enjoyment in these moments within the temple where she could orchestrate the convergence as a single vast instrument. Her serenity as she contemplated her next moves was sharply interrupted by a familiar source of turmoil, her daughter Aurora. There's an urgent matter that you must be made aware of, Aurora said as she glided into the chamber, freed from the constraints of gravity. There are always urgent matters requiring my attention. It is the nature of my position and its accompanying responsibilities. Despite her words, she turned to face Aurora, focusing her attention more completely on this creature of flesh and blood that had once been a part of her. Strange as a concept as it felt to her now. There's a hermit who may be a prophet. He seeks to speak with you. He's waiting outside the entrance of the temple. Excuse me? Excuse me. Sorry. Alright. Aurora said. An aged Iosin who should not even have known of its existence. Who should not know many things that he does. The matters of which he speaks cannot be ignored, however peculiar the source. He is known to me. I have chosen to be merciful and not have him killed. If he does not soon depart, that will be corrected. He is flawed data, an error, nothing more. Aurora stared at her for several long moments, clearly struggling to control some inner turmoil. Despite her efforts, these emotions were clearly writ upon her features, an unpleasantness that the Directrix took as a personal failing. Her daughter's next words were delivered in a tone that suggested an effort to convey deference and respect. He knows mysteries ordinarily reserved for the clergy. He spoke of a revelation that only recently deciphered after extensive work by dozens of our best minds, analyzing the output of the cipher engine. This revelation had a number of fluctuations alarmed, and I am told that you have ignored it. Even the constellation is speaking on this matter. I believe we ignored this at our peril. Do you question my leadership? Directrix modulated her voice to such that the question carried no particular weight. In just 2 years, I will be replaced. At that time, you can assess my effectiveness. I only seek to understand, Aurora said through gritted teeth. It would seem a threat has arisen of a nature that we cannot dismiss. One that could unravel all of our work. We must adjust our plans and intervene as a corrective measure. Already the geonomadic network shudders and shifts in response. Our nodes are potentially imperiled. We need to find out more. Why not take what information we can from this hermit, given that he appears to have unusual insights? We can test and evaluate everything he says. Directrix stepped closer to her daughter, her eyes narrowing. The blades along her cloak snapped and flexed, an outward display of internal agitation. Only Aurora could provoke her in this way. Only she dared. This hermit is a deceiver and a threat to the great work. He would derail all that we have set in motion. I have 2 years left, nothing more. The great work should have been completed by now. Cyrus should be with us. Aurora was visibly annoyed, but Directrix continued. Every day, every week is precious. Yes, perhaps a new threat has arisen to menace humanity. They do not matter. Such people are always going to be impediments to completing our tasks. We will keep our casualties minimized where possible, aware that among the masses there are a few minds worthy of preservation and inclusion. They are a tiny minority. If this new adversary does us the favor of removing our obstacles and culling the weak, I will not stand in their way. Neither will you. This is a mistake, Aurora said, her voice growing angry again. A critical one. Our origins are rooted in humanity. Those who we recruit to join us are found by filtering out the best minds among them. If we allow humanity to be destroyed, it is severing our own growth. The great work must adapt. I must bring this matter before Father Lucant. I hoped for your permission so that we could do this together. The Iron Mother glared back at her progeny. You are to do no such thing. It is I who command, not Lucant. You will not heed the words of the liar over mine. Is he a liar? She asked. I must admit, when I began to talk to him, I thought the same. I thought him a charlatan, but he has proven not to be. Nearly all of what he has told me has been demonstrably true. Nearly all. It is small deceptions that his true agenda is revealed. Aurora said, there is one thing he told me that I did not believe and felt certain was a manipulation, at least at first. As the other matters had been proven out, I began to wonder. She was staring at Directrix intently with a focused and probing look. He told me that Sebastian Nemo was my father, and that his mind holds a key, and upon its recovery hinges on all of our fates. The Directrix froze and stared back at her daughter, becoming cold and utterly machine. She was pleased by her own ability to reveal none of her surprise. She said calmly, you have no father. This is an attempt at manipulation, as you surmised. He is a puppeteer. Do not let him pull your strings. But Aurora's eyes widened and her cheeks flushed as she looked at her mother. Against all logic, it seemed that she had arrived at the opposite conclusion. It's all true, isn't it? She whispered as if amazed. Then she turned and flew swiftly to the opposite direction, towards the chamber's exit. Aurora, return! That is an order! Her daughter did not obey. In that moment, the Iron Mother found herself unwilling to resort to violence to enforce her command. She felt a number of strong emotions, desperate despite herself, but her decision to let Aurora go was a calculated one. Though incensed at the defiance, a calmer part of her mind considered that this might be present a way to succeed where they had once failed, to bring a great and stubborn mind into the fold. Woo! In case you guys didn't know, that was the Iron Mother Directrix, the leader of the Convergence of Cyrus. And if I made her sound so robotic, that's by choice, because members of the Convergence of Cyrus have found a way to transfer their minds into android bodies. They call them clockwork bodies, but they're really robots. So she's effectively has a living mind inside of a clockwork machine. She's an android. So that's why she comes off so matter-of-factly, like cold, hard logic. She's basically a human who has become a robot. and a lot of them are. Aurora is not. She is cybernetically enhanced, hence her ability to fly, but she is not. She has not made the transfer yet. As for her father, Sebastian Nemo is considered one of the smartest men in all of the Iron Kingdoms. The guy is a genius. He's basically Doc Brown in steampunk armor. He's that goddamn smart. So finding out that your father is the smartest man in the entire continent, that's a big thing. Now let's head back to Caspia, see how the battle is going. Illuminated One Glenn Cormier had quickly decided that the best service that she could provide in this battle was to watch Constance Blaze's back and ensure that none of these horrific enemies flanked the Warcaster. Given the foe sometimes manifested without warning from anywhere, this proved to be prudent. One of the armored infernal soldiers coalesced out of smoke directly behind the Warcaster, and she struck, her sword glowing with holy light. She fired her pistol at another approaching form to the right. She shared a quick look with Blaze, who nodded thanks before turning and raising her shield against the charge of a greater horror rushing at her. The massive brute had just toppled over her lancer. The machine's eyes were still lit, and it struggled to pull itself up to the nearest foe with its spear, but its legs were shattered. Blaze still managed to exploit its arc node to send an explosion of light into several of the floating lesser infernals closer to her precursor knights. Glenn was filled with admiration for the Knight of the Prophet, without whom she was certain the battle would have already been lost. They never would have been able to press their advantage past the castle's entryway without her, though they had since been beset by a second wave of fresh infernal horrors. Only a handful of their vigilance and precursor knights endured. They now sought shelter behind a fallen column. They could hear the sounds of fighting all around them and behind them. In an attempt to reach the gateway, they pressed on despite having outpaced their supporting soldiers. There was a sense of urgency, as they could not hope to gain ground on a foe so long as the infernal gateway was open. Their numbers diminished while the infernals increased. Glenn had begun to despair every time one of her comrades fell. They did not have the manpower for such tactics. The Grand Master had managed to get a word to the Signarin army mechanics to hasten to the castle with every functioning warjack they could muster, machines either intended to be shipped north to the ongoing war in Lael or set aside to be repaired and rearmed. Several of these machines had arrived just in time to replace the downed machines that the Warcaster's ill-fated battle group. Of her original machines, Gallant alone still endured, but it had been badly battered and walked with a limp, its engine sputtering. The beleaguered machine took another punishing blow to its chest after intercepting the horror Blaze had defeated against. The Warcaster was forced to take several steps back. Glenn could see streaks of blood on her face, as well as spurtering across her armor. It was clear how much of that was her own, or shed by other pious Morwins killed defending her. "Look out!" Glenn shouted as something from above them descended, a black sword in hand, an assassin that had been lurking in the upper ramparts of the castle's main entryway. Glenn moved to safeguard Blaze and take the brunt of the attack, even knowing the Warcaster was more than capable of surviving such a strike as she was. Even as she braced against what might be a fatal blow, the figure's sword sank deep into the infernal horror, driving it back down the momentum of the fall. The sword was limned with reddish flames, and the figure attired in black, wearing a hood that fell back to reveal raven hair as she landed. The horror staggered under the blow and then collapsed, howling as it turned to ash. Unlike the other horrors that she had vanquished, however, something was different had transpired on its expiration. Rather than dispersing into so much smoke, the disintegrated essence swept up into a swirling cyclone that was devoured by the black sword. Looking upon its naked blade, Glenn felt a shudder through her body and a sharp pain in her mind as she felt as it came straight through her eyes. She had an instance of recognition during which her own sword white light glittered. It was the witch fire. Alexia. She spat like a curse, recognizing one of the most infamous foes of the Order of Illumination. Get back, bride of darkness! She advanced, gripping her sword with both hands and moving between Alexia and Constance Blaze. She felt certain the Warcaster must be the soul-stealing sword's next intended victim. Alexia glared back. Her eyes were wild, as if lit within the same unnatural fire that danced along her blade's edge. The witch fire was a relic of such power that it was said to have been the instrument of the ascension of the scion of necromancy, and it would seem that the infernal horrors were not also immune to its power. Though Glenn Cormier could not be among the several of the illuminated ones who had been undone by Alexia over the years, she had heard stories. It was said that Alexia was insane, and also that she shared her mind with her souls, stolen and preserved in the witch fire itself, struggling to control over her consciousness, and by extension, her necromantic magic. Whatever her mental state, no matter how perilous her sorcery, it was the witch fire itself that was the true danger, a source of seemingly unending black magic. The sword was a font of unholy energies that could defile any corpse within reach, barring only those who had been thoroughly consecrated. Almost a decade ago, the Church of Morrow managed to secure the blade and had intended to be sealed away out of the reach of mortal hands, but Alexia had stolen it back and had thwarted them at every turn. She is not your foe, Comier. Stand down. This demand came from another strong and familiar male voice from above. Another figure leapt down, aided by a thin rope with one gloved hand. He was garbed in the uniform of the Order of Illumination, though in a style that was slightly out of date, reminiscent of the witch hunts from 2 decades ago. His other hand gripped a heavy quad-barrel pistol, which he had fired as he descended, striking the nearest infernal brutes, squared off against the remaining precursors. This was Harlan Versh, a man who had also been an illuminated one in his day, though he had been exiled and gone rogue some time ago, accused of disobeying the Order's leadership and conducting improper executions. Seeing the man here and apparently fighting alongside Alexia was quite the shock. For all his faults, Verse was a zealot, a man who had continued to fight the forces of darkness even when left with no support or resources from the Order which he once belonged. "What are you doing here, Versh?" she demanded. Several of the nearest vigilants had drawn their own pistols and were looking between Comier and Alexia, clearly on edge and sharing her confusion. They looked to Constance for guidance, but the Warcaster herself was looking at Comier. "This is your call, Illuminated One," she said. Verse shook his head. We're here to help. Stop the Infernos is our only goal. Alexia is my ally in this. I have reason to believe she can close the gate, if we can get her close enough." Glenn glanced around, seeking the Grand Master, but he was not in sight, having been drawn off to one of the adjoining corridors and amid the larger fight. Turning back, she saw Alexia watching her. Glenn knew more Infernals would be upon them. They could not afford to stand idle. "You trust her? After she's killed many of our brothers and sisters." "The fault was mine. This they sought to take but was mine," Alexia interjected. "We are now at truce. You cannot afford to do this on your own. I have brought reinforcements." Alexia raised the black sword over her head, and herself was surrounded by a sheet of the same flickering flame. They heard the marching of what sounded like thousands of boots, and through the entranceway, they fought to march a disciplined procession of undead soldiers. Though their heads and arms were skeletal, the gleaming light glowed within the orbs of the sockets in their skulls, and they possessed none of the malevolence of rapes or thralls. They marched in time with one another like an army on parade. Each weapon had been held scrupulously at the same angle. "Verse, you would have us consort with the undead?" Glenn asked incredulously. "These are not undead as you know them. Verse answered, looking her in the eye. This is the Legion of the Lost Souls. They are holy revenants entombed by Moro and his hosts of Archons 300 years ago, safeguarded for a time when they would be needed to rise against the darkness. It was they who saved Corvus almost a decade ago, but it was not the true darkness that they awaited. It's here now. Glenn could recognize the sigils on the armor of the new arrivals, and she had no choice but to believe him. Each was attired in ancient armor, armed to the style of the Lost Eternals, a devout force that had once fought alongside the Signarin army. She said, "Very well. A truce." Additional hooded clawed infernals arrived from the shadows amid the otherworldly howls and rushed to slay the living. They were met by the spectral horde, which rallied against them and shouted battle cries in the name of Signar and Moro. Strange as the sight was, it boasted those present, and the precursors and the soldiers of the Order of Illumination, exhausted as they were fighting alongside them. Constance Blaze, with Gauntlet at her side, turned to face Alexia, and then looked between Harlan Versh and Glenn Cormier, and she said, "We will try to buy you time to get to the gate. We must hurry." Alexia and the pair of illuminated ones climbed again the upper levels, while fighting continued at a greater fever pitch below. The haggard but reinforced Morrowians fought through the outer walls of the castle with haste, leaving the dead and fallen as they were, pressing on to the eastern courtyard. The trio was above them, scrambling along the narrow battlements, walkways, and across segments of the castle's exterior surfaces. Both illuminated ones could not resist occasionally shooting their blessed pistols in support of those below, finishing off wounded infernals. Alexia also sent blazing green hellfire down on the foe, though for the moment she was too distracted to focus on such magic, gritting her teeth against the bickering of the voices in her mind. "You are making promises you don't know how to keep," Lexarina said sternly. This was the voice of Alexia's mother, critical as always. "Let her be," said Hesteris, another of the doomed coven whose souls were bound to her own. "She's trying her best. What else should she do? Try her best? We're heading towards an infernal gate. None of us know how to close one of those." "The witch fire can do it," Alexia hissed at them irritably, only realizing she had spoken aloud when Glenn Cormier shot her an alarmed glance. Closing her mouth, she said in her mind, "I do not know exactly how yet, but it's possible. I'm certain." "It would be easier," said Yasmina, another bodiless coveter, in a more soothing voice, "if you will allow us to help with the sword. Ease your burden. You should not keep its power to yourself." "I'm sure you would like that," she answered sharply. "Now be silent, we're nearly there." Clambering over another battlement, they were able to look down upon what had once been the beautiful garden inside of a large courtyard in Castle Routhorn. It was now a pit of shadows, smoke, and madness. It was difficult to make sense of what her eyes perceived below, viewed through a warped haze and obscured by pockets of living darkness broken up by patches of orange and yellow light reminiscent of lava. Myriad forms of all shapes and sizes were gathered below, including robed humans that had been infernal cultists. They provided a sense of scale for the much larger infernals with them. Despite the haze, the gateway was clear to see, looming above all and dominating the scene at one end of the twisted garden. What looked to be rippling black water was stretched between the two rune-inscribed stone pillars marked in red glyphs. The gateway. As she watched several more horrors step through. They walked towards an impossibly tall and elegant-looking entity draped in black robes and carrying an ornate book and scroll instead of weapons. While its upper body seemed humanoid and a white face stared out from below its hood, its lower torso dissolved into a smoky darkness in a fashion not unlike Crixian Bane's. This being was involved in a mystical ritual, its hands moving in precise patterns, its attentions focused entirely on the gateway, though it turned to face one of the nearest entrances at the sound of fighting. Gunfire erupted, including the distant noise of a spurned-up chain gun and the clanking of a warjack firing mechanisms. A sentinel and a charger rushed into the courtyard, firing at the nearest infernal brutes. Yelling battle cries, soldiers of both the Order of Illumination and the Legion of Lost Souls charged behind them, led by Constance Blaze and Gabriel Thorne. It was an impressive entrance, but the attacking forces looked feeble and insignificant against the horde filling the courtyard. Each infernal creature was a living nightmare. There were slender ones that crawled forward on clawed limbs, each as tall as a man and sharpened to a point. One managed to pierce a precursor knight through the chest with one of its bladed limbs before unrolling a thorny tongue from its mauling mouth to tear the skin from his face. Others floated like squids through the air, tentacles trailing behind them. One of these glowed with a red light as a vortex of blackened energy appeared to pull several vigilants together before exploding to shred them apart. Alexia sensed the origin of all this powerful magic flowing through this place was the tall and slender humanoid Infernal remaining near the gateway. As runic symbols flickered into being around the dizzying sequence, she perceived its arcane strength and was far beyond that of any mortal she ever faced. "Flee this place! We should not be here!" This was the moaning of Catherine, the meekest of the Covenanters in Alexia's mind. She was swiftly suppressed and smothered by the others. Alexia ignored the voice and nodded towards Versh, who had holstered his pistol and shrugged a coil of rope on his shoulder. He began spinning a grappling hook and attached at the end and letting it fly with an expert toss to send it over to the closest side of the stone-like pillars that served as the archway for the Infernal's gate. The hook bit into the wooden beam behind it and struck fast. He tied it off at one end near the chimney. "We'll cover you," Cormier said as both illuminated ones raised their pistols. "You had best strike now," said Versh, "whilst the infernal curator has his eyes elsewhere." Alexia and Versh shared a brief look, and Alexia discovered that she felt a very confusing blend of emotions. She could not view Versh as a friend, given the unlikely way they had become allies in this, and yet they had found a way to work together surprisingly well after the rough beginning. They tried to kill each other on several times, though it was now hard for Alexia to remember the exact sequence of events. Yet she felt certain part of him still wanted her dead. She never would have guessed that she might one day risk her life, as well as her entire quest to restore her mother, for Castle Routhorn, for Caspia. She gripped the rope in one gloved hand and held the hilt of the black sword in the other as she readied to make her move. She considered what might befall everyone if she did as Catherine desired, if she just turned and fled. It was tempting. Why risk herself and her mother? She could not explain it rationally. She did not care for any of these people, not really, nor the city. But with the witch fire in hand, she felt glorious cold power flow through her, a sense that could a strength that could refuse to be daunted. Though she had resisted the urge to consider it a thinking being, the witch fire did seem to have a will of its own. It felt eager to plunge into the courtyard below. It had thrummed in her hand when she had pierced the infernal horror earlier. The sword savored slaying mages and stealing their souls. This was a similar hunger, but even greater. It was as if she had not known she was starving until she tasted the flesh of her favorite prey. The gateway yawned open below her, aroused her in a disembodied anger that was not entirely her own. Was she the wielder, or was she the one being wielded? She was not entirely sure, but decided it didn't matter at that point. She leapt and slid down the rope, headed straight for the rippling surface of the gate. Bullets whizzed past her to impact Infernals nearest the arches. Several of these bullets came a bit too close for comfort. "Are you sure they aren't trying to hit you?" Larixina asked, but Alexia ignored her mother's voice. She released the rope as she neared the lowest point of the curved arc, and took the witch fire in both hands, striking it deeply into the pool of darkness, as if it were flesh of a foe. The blade pierced the darkness without resistance as her feet hit the ground, and she nearly fell through the portal itself, stumbling instead to her knees. There was a moment of muffled silence, as if cotton had been crammed into her ears. Then the hilt vibrated violently. A blast of cold and heat threw her backwards. A piercing jolt of pain shot through her arm and then through her mind. She managed to retain hold of the hilt, but was cast back several yards from the gateway, feeling dazed. Even as she struggled to regain her feet, she could see the black surface was still there. The gate remained open. She had heard familiar voices screaming in pain. It took a moment to realize they weren't in her head. Looking up in alarm, she saw ghostly Howl's specter's spears swirling in a wide orbit around her, still tethered to her by the thin and fragile strands of spiritual energy. It was her mother and the Covenanters, apparently knocked free from her body. Alexia felt a strange and dulled pain within, as if her own soul fought to stay anchored. She looked for Versh and Cormier to see that if they had witnessed her plight, but they also had made their descent and were occupied with clashing with horrors defending the infernal curator. The wielder of the witch fire heard a strange sound, like a rattling exultation, and turned to see a soul striker that had been attached to her plight. The serpentine horror swam through the air on sinuous coiling motions. Lengths of grotesque tentacles that emit streaks of darkness twitched along its back, and then others protruded like feelers from its mouth, reaching up from the soul streaking through the air. The fiend seized Yasmin and pulled her essence into itself, looping around Alexia as it gathered Hestrina and began to pull closer to Alexia. They shrieked in pain. Pain Alexia felt. She tightened the grip on the witch fire and sought to harness its power with her necromancy to resist, to draw the Covenanters' souls back. With great effort of will, she was able to keep her mother's soul from being swallowed, but just barely. The others were being inexorably drawn into its tentacled maw. Gabriel Thorne cursed under his breath as he saw Alexia's failed strike on the gate, and then watched her assailed by the soul striker, the soul stalker. She had bravely struck the heart of the foe, but he had wished that she had waited until his own forces had pressed their way deeper into the courtyard. She was surrounded and cut off. He shouted to Countess Blaze, "We need to get up there!" He parried a clawed arm of the nearest infernal brute and retaliated with a downward cleaving blow of his sword that sunk deep into his chest. He urged his horse forward, using its mass to push it forward even as it began to disintegrate. Blaze was fighting next to him, and she redoubled her efforts to clear the foe, sending Gallant recklessly forward. A disturbance at the gate caught his attention. He saw the black rippling of the surface of the portal split as something huge and terrifying stepped through. His mind quailed at the sight of it. He felt his eyes sliding from it, as if though refusing to confront it directly. The new figure was broad, armored from form, wearing a dark metal helmet adorned with blades and spikes. Its curved slits of its visage glowed brightly. Its lower quarters swirled in a seething smoke that shivered with flicks of red and orange as if it was on fire. In each of its oversized hands held a chain from which bladed weights dangled, each as large as a man's torso. Constance Blaze impaled one of the last brutes that stood in Gabriel's way, and he spurned his horse, prompting it to leap ahead, taking him to a headlong lunge towards the infernal juggernaut before him. He raised his blade to strike at the newly arrived monstrosity, giving a bellowing cry, but it moved more swiftly than he had ever thought possible. Before his strike could even land, the massive head of one of its chain flails crashed into his chest with enough impact to knock him from his steed. The Grand Master was sent tumbling off into a thorny hedge. He groaned in pain as he groped with his hand to find purchase enough to get back on his feet. The wind was knocked out of him, though he thought his breastplate had held, preventing his ribs from being shattered. He emerged just in time to see the Juggernaut's next swing headed straight for Constance, but Gallant was in motion and managed to intercept, enduring as an armor-clad crumpling impact as it tore open its torso and drove the machine to its knees. A follow-up blow hit the Knight of the Prophet's shield, and tore it from her grasp as it sent her stumbling back. They had yet so much as scratched the thing. The infernal master seemed like a death machine, seething with red smoke and malice. Blaze gave out a cry and raised her bladed spear towards the heavens as she unleashed a huge bolt of holy light, one that seemed to take every last scrap of her own strength. But if she had been seeking to blind the infernal juggernaut bearing down on her, it seemed as though her efforts had failed. It continued undaunted. Then, from a pool of light Constance created, something else stepped into the world. An angelic armored figure that soared forward to clash with the infernal, bringing searing light against the darkness. In a moment, Gabriel realized that not one angelic form had arrived, but two. From deep within the shadows projected by the burst of light stepped another figure, a dark angel in black armor, wielding a slender bow. He knew it at once what they were: holy emissaries of the twins, Morrow and Thamar. The pain Alexia felt deep within worsened, joined as a sharper, splintering headache into her head. It felt as though her soul was being torn from her body, like to join the others. The soul stalker coiled around her like a constricting serpent, darkness oozing from its tentacles and slathering mouth. She could hear her mother screaming, but she could not discern the words. Time seemed to slow, and it felt as though Alexia had been taken outside of her body to look down upon herself as the stalker succeeded in pulling loose that which had been anchored to her flesh. She watched her own soul as if it encircled. She watched as her own soul was encircled by one of its tentacles and pulled towards its fanged mouth. Alexia felt paralyzed at the sight of her own immortal essence being devoured. From the periphery of her vision, Alexia was aware of the desperate charge of Gabriel Thorne and Constance Blaze. She was herself nearly blinded by the blast of light that the Warcaster emitted, during which the Soul Stalker's constrictive clench loosened just barely, giving her body a chance to gasp for breath. Even as disjointed and disconnected as she felt, Alexia marveled at the unexpected miracle that had arrived in the pair of archons, one light, one dark. Yet a cynical part of her mind reflected that it was Blaze and Thorn these figures would save, not her. It was too late. Her soul was torn loose and was about to be swallowed. She could anticipate the serpentine horror flicking its tongue, darting back and forth at the yawning portal, taking Alexia, her mother, and the other Covenanters, and adding them to a vast harvest. Despite this presentiment, she felt transfixed by the sight of the light and dark archons, joined now against a shared foe. Selfishness and sacrifice, the virtues of the twins she felt were manifested in her own being. She would not surrender her soul. She would not become a coin after an infernal treasury. She would rather die. Though separated from her body, she could still move, still act. Her grip on the witch fire, which blazed with an unholy fire, tightened. It was a tool made to divide souls from flesh, to tear the cords connecting souls to Urkane. It was greedy and a selfish blade. She knew what she must do. As the stalker's momentarily loosened grip laxed, Alexia's arm holding the witch fire slipped free. She switched her grip to seize the blade itself down to the hilt, from the hilt, allowing her to maneuver to the point closer to herself, setting it against the hide of the stalker. She took hold of the blade in both hands, drawing it from her magic to assist, and then pulled the point towards the stalker. It shrieked, and she reached again to grab farther back along the blade, closer to the crossguard, driving it inward again, deeper. The witch fire pierced the soul stalker, and it went through and into her own midsection. She felt the heat and cold of the blade as it drove through her, and she watched from above as her soul was yanked from the soul stalker's grip, seized by the witch fire. There was a pulse of dark fire. The stalker exploded into a swirling smoke, and that the black sword quickly swallowed. With it came the souls that it had seized. Arserenia, Catherine, Hestius, Yasmina, and many others that she did not know. Souls swept into the rich fire, and the blade was awakened with a pulse of pure black power, seeking to channel the energy of the souls of its wielder, creating a Mobius loop of infinite possibilities. The sword had become a conduit, stealing that which it was already possessed, giving strength to that which was destroyed. Alexia's soul vanished into the black metal, swallowed, and then also safeguarded, becoming one with the blade. And as this happened, it also unlocked her mind a more competent understanding. Necromantic power reinvigorated her deathly dying flesh. Sorry about that. Yeah. And closed her wound as she extricated the sword from her torso. Death was denied. A spiral of darkness surrounded her, but she could see clearly through it. She could see the infernal gateway with fresh eyes now that her soul was no longer part of her body. There she saw the energy that was poured from one side to another, exalting from beyond Urkane, entering through a crack created by an invitation offered amid a tide of blood and souls. She saw how similar this stream was to the smaller thread that connected a living soul to Urkane, a tether that would pull a soul into this realm of the dead once the body was gone. The witch fire could sever such cords. Once again, watching from outside her own body, ignoring the frightening questions of her mother and the others that joined her, she drove the witch fire into the gate. This time, she did not strike the rippling black portal through which the infernals had come as she had before. Rather, she struck the carved pillar on one side, at a place near the center where the runes began, where the energy of the summoning was knotted. There was a sound like shattering glass and breaking stone. She twisted the sword, and the stone shattered. The black liquid of the portal also broke, and shattered like drops of mercury. The tempestuous wind swept through the garden, followed by another howl, this one indignant. Glenn Cormier gasped as though to witness the infernal horrors, and soldiers began to shred apart and disintegrate into ash and smoke, as if by their own accord. Across the battlefield, dozens of surviving orders of illumination soldiers stepped back, and looked at their enemies vanish before their eyes. It took her a moment to realize the black portal had vanished. She felt a rush of relief, a heartfelt prayer to the prophet on her lips, until a large figure across the courtyard, its body breaking through a statue before her, landing in an unturned up soil. Its limbs were bent unnaturally, its armor battered and bloodied, its once majestic wings broken and rent, its once fearsome eyes now lifeless, staring at nothing. The infernal with the chained flails stood behind the Archon, triumphant, unaffected by whatever had caused the other horrors to disperse. She was frozen in horror as Gabriel Thorne ran to it with a sob, still bleeding from his own wounds. The winged Archon had been similarly rent and undone, seared by fire from the other remaining infernals, the Curator, whose magic had been mightier than the arrows. For a moment, there was a lull as each side took stock of the other. As the Morrowinds weighed how the holy archons of the twins had so been easily defeated. Several were weeping at the sight, and Glenn realized that her own cheeks were wet with tears. A small victory, said an older man standing near the Curator. She recognized him as Orin Midwinter. Gathered protectively in a circle around Midwinter and the two infernal masters were the remaining cultists in robes and masks, each with knives drawn to protective against any Morrowind advance. Midwinter said, his voice rising triumphantly, "There are many gates like this one. There will be many more in days ahead. The claiming right is complete, and the reaping of humanity has just begun." Verse was standing halfway across the garden, near where the gallant had fallen. He looked weary and possibly injured, but he had lifted his pistol. Even as he pulled the trigger, the center of the garden was filled with leaping shadows. When they scattered, The Infernals and their collaborators were gone. Yep. They had one victory and just suffered two more. The Infernals lost a lot of their military and the gate is destroyed, but the main ones are still alive, and the two Archons sent by the twins, curb stomped. I told you, this war won't be easily fought. So now we see what's going on with the Signarans. But what about going north? What are the Khadorans doing? The Mulgore Forest, northern Khador. Zavanna Aga walked into the clearing, leaning on her staff as she approached the gnarled and lifeless tree occupying the small hill at the center. As always, it appeared as though it had been forever since it had been here forever, its twisted roots sunk deep into the hardened soil. Amid the shadows created between these roots and other crevices of the trunk was the gleaming of bone, with half-shattered skulls in every nook and cranny. Other bones dangled from its branches, strung together with knots of tendons to create tinkling chimes, one of the few sounds other than the occasional cawing of carrion birds. A light snow drifted lazily down from overcast skies, and there was a slight smell of smoke in the air. Behind Aga loomed the enormously modified Scrapjack, which had been transformed into a conveyance and a dwelling, topped with an elaborate ornery. She instructed it to stay at the edge of the trees and stand still, lest it be provoked by any of the glade's guardians. She was not here to fight. Not this time. The vine-wrapped Oathkeeper, the one called Cassius, stood before the Tree of Fate and awaited her. As always, she ignored him and remained focused on Wormwood, knowing the former druid only served as a voice for the greater being embodied within the withered tree. They stood for a time in muted silence, for a vast understanding lay between them, nearly as vast as the gulf between their immortal perspectives. It had been the Wormwood that initiated the summit, so Zavanna Aga did not give it the satisfaction of speaking first, though she knew that if there was one being more patient than she, it was the Tree of Fate. She knew the first words would be insulting. One did not need prophetic vision to see it. Cassius said, "Look, it would seem all warnings were for naught. Your efforts to forestall the claiming failed." Aga sighed and said, "The wicked harvest took some of their pets from them. They did not want to come here now. Not yet. I forced them to be hasty. Mistakes will be made." "We could have done so much more," Cassius said. "Had we burnt and flooded the cities, swept all of their great works away, they would have been little for them to take, to defile." "Perhaps," Aga said. "There are many at play at this, beings greater than you and I. Foolish gods, full of pride. They do not easily abandon what they have made. Then again, neither would I do." Cassius did not reply at this, and she wondered if the Wormwood did not appreciate her suggestion that any being was greater than him. Sometimes the ancient tree did not remember it was not itself the worm, no more than Zavanna Aga was the mother of all. She was the crone. Hers was a different role, a bloodier one. The robed figure entered the glade at the opposite edge of Scrapjack, and she turned to face this unexpected arrival with a deepening scowl. The Iosan hermit with the long beard walked across the intervening ground without concern for whatever guardians of the circle of Boros Wormwood had left in its perimeter, which seemed to have left it alone. Aga's eye went to the small gremlin walking just behind the herald-looking hermit, which was clinging to the hem of his robe. She hissed at it, and it looked up at her if startled, then let go of the robe, and it raced to her side, looking chastened. The hermit did not appear to notice or mind its detection. Do you invite this seeker?" Zavanna asked, but Cassius did not answer. He stared at the new arrival coldly, Wormwood's thoughts were its own. The hermit looked between them, his eyes dim, his expression harrowed, and he said, "I will not insult you by pretending I could tell you anything that you do not already know is to come. I am here as a messenger. Know that apart from this task, I am ready to lend you aid in the days to come, should you require it." With some difficulty, it took the massive scroll case he carried from his shoulder, one end falling with a thud to the soil. He bent down steadily and then unlatched a pair of clasps as he kept it closed. From within, he extricated a pair of rolled up and sealed scrolls, which dangled from several long strips of rune-inscribed parchment. He extended one to Zavanna, the other towards Cassius. "What is this?" she asked, though she thought she already knew. "I was sent by Zagavroth, the Weaver of Shadows, the Executor of Debts, and the Judge of all troops. Here is the list of her terms and her demands." And that brings an end to Render in Shadows. This is our first taste of what the claiming has done. And it is just as apocalyptic as I've been letting you all to believe. And unfortunately, my voice is about to go out, and I really want to do this a little bit more, but fortunately, we can't. So we'll have to leave it right here. But next time we stream, I'll be getting into the Henchhold Scrolls, which will chronicle all the battles and all the different alliances that are being drawn across Western Emerald, because as you've seen, it's not just Signar that's handling this. It's just everywhere. Signar, they're just getting a taste of the claiming. It's everywhere. And you're going to see alliances between rivals and enemies that you never thought you'd see. This is all hands on deck, my friends. The claiming is big. So, I hope I have kept you entertained for this All Hallows Eve. Hope you had a good time. Hope you enjoyed some candy. I want to thank Devil for showing up. Reminded everyone that Sunday is my birthday, so if you feel like you want to drop some birthday cash for it, my PayPal and my Cash App are on the screen right now, as it has been for the last couple of hours. So feel free to drop me something. Any of it is appreciated and welcome. I don't know when I'll stream again, but hopefully we'll make this another normal thing. So, with that out of the way, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff. And I thank you for listening if you still are. So until next time, this has been Shintigercurl, that dude in the straw hat, saying good day, good night, happy Halloween, and hold on to your butts, because it's going to get nastier.